Chapter 794. The debate had already reached the climax, and no one dared to answer Alton's sharp questions. If the revolutionaries couldn't come up with a response, then the conservative faction would emerge victorious. However, right at this moment, someone suddenly barged into the venue. Everyone turned to look at the strange duo at the entrance. The short-haired young man and the half-elf girl didn't seem to have anything to do with this debate, so they were even more perplexed as to why they were here. Who is he? Alton glowered at Meg with a cold expression. If he could end this debate with a single sentence, then his reputation in the academic world would definitely skyrocket. As such, he was naturally not in a good mood to be interrupted at such a crucial moment. Is he the chef from the royal banquet yesterday? Irma faltered slightly at the sight of the father and daughter duo standing at the entrance. He had also attended the royal banquet the day before, so he naturally still remembered this pair of father and daughter. However, he didn't think that he would see them here again. Could it be that the debate was going to provide free meals? Did they invite him here to cook for them? That's right. Why is he here instead of cooking for His Majesty? Roy looked at Meg with furrowed brows. The revolutionaries were also quite perplexed as they didn't know who this intruder was. Teacher Luna. Amy hugged Ugly Duckling a little tighter as she greeted Luna with a smile. Amy, Mr. Meg. A faint smile appeared on Luna's nervous face. Even though he was a little late, Meg had still arrived, and the debate wasn't over yet. My apologies, I was delayed on the way here. Meg nodded in an apologetic manner. He wasn't the one who had made the breakfast, so it was a little difficult for him to choose. He had always been a punctual person. Mr. Meg, this way please. Byron rose to his feet with a smile on his face. All right. Meg gestured for Amy to stand beside Luna while he made his way over to Byron. Eldon said unhappily, Lord Byron, what do you mean? The head-to-head battle was still in progress, so how could they allow irrelevant people to interrupt? What's more, he's a chef who doesn't even know how to count. Do you want a chef to come on stage and debate for you? The people from the conservative faction burst into laughter. They looked at Meg with disdain. How could a chef know how to count? Then wouldn't they be the same as chefs? Not only is Mr. Meg the chef who won the Best Dish award, but he's also the one who came up with the Mamie multiplication table. It's exactly because of his exceptional research that it's so easy to popularize arithmetic, and that's why this debate is taking place. Byron looked at Mag with a hint of approval in his eyes as he said, How can you say that he has nothing to do with this? Among the people present, who was more qualified than him to sit here? Today, he is our sixth debater. He's the Mr. Meg who came up with the Mamie multiplication table? Lister's eyes lit up. The simple and catchy formula was imbued with astonishing wisdom. He had thought that someone who could come up with such an intricate formula had to be an elderly and wise scholar, but who would have thought that it would be a young man who was around his age? The people of the Reformists were also shocked to hear this. If it weren't for the fact that they were amazed by the ingenuity of Mamie's multiplication table, which almost overturned their understanding of mathematics, they wouldn't have switched to the decimal system camp in such a short time and attempted to reform the system as rebels. Furthermore, the person who had come up with such an intricate formula was so young, and he was a chef. The fact that Byron was praising Mag in such a manner made everyone reassess him in a new light. The fact that he had won the Best Dish award at the Palace banquet indicated that his skills as a chef were already at the pinnacle of the world. What kind of mathematical prowess did a chef like him possess? Alton looked at Meg with a mocking expression and said, No wonder your so-called multiplication table is so crude, it was created by a chef. Looks like I overestimated this formula. If I had known that this was a slobbering song that a chef came up with in the kitchen, I definitely wouldn't have participated in this debate. The Conservative Party also showed a sense of superiority on their faces. They were born as nobles, and as scholars, they naturally had a sense of superiority. Even if they were facing an ordinary noble, they would feel superior to them, let alone a vulgar chef. Even the people on the reformist side looked a little unnatural. Byron hadn't revealed much information about Meg, so they didn't even know his age, let alone his occupation. For people like them who had already established a foothold in the academic world, it was inevitable that they would find it absurd to work so hard for a formula proposed by a chef. Catchiness is the basis for widespread dissemination. For basic education, this means that it can be infinitely replicated and quickly popularized. Meg stopped in front of the platform and looked at Alton with a smile as he said, "Basic mathematics is a practical subject, it's not some pretentious art. If you try to study two-digit multiplication, which even 3-year-old children can easily solve, as advanced arithmetic, and praise each other in the circle to satisfy your pitiful self-esteem, then this layer of cloth will soon be torn apart by the decimal system and the multiplication table." Meg's gaze swept across the 5 old men on the platform, as well as the white-robed conservatives in the hall, and a mocking smile appeared on his face as he said, "So, you're already afraid. Afraid that those ignorant commoners will one day be able to easily come up with an answer that you have to rack your brains to come up with? When that damned sense of superiority disappears, it's going to be very uncomfortable, right?" The conservatives' faces all changed. Meg's words were like knives. Every sentence was so sharp that it made people feel uncomfortable. Change was a disturbing thing. Those new things made people feel unfamiliar and vigilant, so they were more willing to continue to stay in this familiar safe zone. No matter how good the new things were, as long as they stayed in the safe zone, they could continue to maintain their current state and stand in a position where people looked up to them. The eyes of the reformists lit up. During this period of time, they had been pushed to the ground by the other party. Moreover, the other party was a leading figure in the academic world, so they were even more cautious when speaking. Unlike Meg, who was as sharp as a knife, they couldn't help but want to cheer. Alton pointed at Meg and said angrily, You're talking nonsense. Mathematics isn't child's play. If a 3-year-old child can calculate two-digit multiplication, I'll stop writing and go home from today onwards. However, if you're talking nonsense, then you should tell the world that your so-called multiplication table is nothing but nonsense. Chapter 795. The rules were very simple, and the competition was very fair. It was a little one-sided to determine the superiority of the two systems based on calculation speed, but it was the most direct way to determine the winner. However, the age gap between the adorable AI Me and the wise Fei Qi was far too obvious. Even if Fei Qi won under fair rules, he probably wouldn't gain much fame from this duel. Instead, he might even become a joke in the future. Meg was the one who had proposed the rules, and he was also the one who had sent out his daughter. Irma was already making a concession by sending his disciple Fitch instead of himself. Of course, if Irma were to take the field himself, then he would become the laughingstock of the entire Norland continent. Irma looked at Byron and said in a serious voice, "Seeing as the rules have been decided, let's begin." This battle over the decimal system had been going on for far too long. Even though the current situation was still within their control, more and more people were trying to learn about the decimal system and the so-called Mamie multiplication table as the revolutionaries continued to build momentum. This wasn't good news, so they had to suppress this matter as soon as possible. If they could make the person who had proposed the Mamie multiplication table admit that it was nothing more than a fabrication, then it would undoubtedly be a devastating blow to the reformists. Byron turned to Mag, and after receiving a slight nod from him, he also nodded, and said, "All right, let's begin." Meg squatted down and turned to Amy with a smile as he said, "Amy, I need you to solve an arithmetic problem now. Do it according to the method that Father taught you, then shout out the answer." Okay. Xiaomi will definitely win. Amy nodded confidently. During this period of time, she had been learning arithmetic from her father for half an hour every day. You're just a little brat. How dare you think you can solve a two-digit multiplication problem? You're dreaming. Alton pursed his lips as he looked at Amy with disdain in his eyes. He dared to provoke Meg into this bet, so he naturally had absolute confidence in himself. Even he was full of praise for Fitch's calculation speed. Moreover, this child was indeed a genius and had yet to reach the upper limit. As long as he continued to be obedient, these few old fellows did not mind raising him to a higher position. In the future, he might achieve greater achievements than them. I'm Fitch. Fitch walked up and looked at Amy. He bent down and extended his hand to her, his expression calm and his actions gentlemanly. I'm Amy. Amy looked up at Fitch and also extended her little hand. However, before her small hand could reach out, it was grabbed by a large hand. After letting go of Amy's hand, Meg looked at Fitch with a smile and said, I think this will be an interesting duel. Yes, because you will lose to an opponent called Amy, Amy added with a serious expression. Fitch straightened his back and looked at Meg with a smile as he said, I've always looked forward to interesting duels, but it's very difficult to find one like this. The middle-aged man who was acting as the MC made his way over to the stage, and announced, both contestants, please take your positions. Both contestants will propose a number, which will be converted to decimal and hexadecimal respectively. The first contestant to reach a correct answer will win. Someone had already brought over a pen and paper, as well as 2 tables for Amy and Fitch. The two of them sat back to back with a distance of 3 meters between them. Amy gently placed Ugly Duckling on the table, and said in a quiet voice, Ugly Duckling, don't run or make a fuss. I'll be fine after a while. Otherwise, I'll eat you. Meow, Ugly Duckling lay down obediently on the table and let loose a soft cry, but it did not dare to move. Fitch sat at the table with a calm expression. Just by sitting there, he gave off a sense of security, indicating that he was a trustworthy person. Meg was also given a pen and paper. After a brief moment of contemplation, he wrote down 56 on a piece of paper and handed it to the MC. Irma also handed a piece of paper to the MC almost at the exact same time. Soon, someone converted the numbers written by both contestants into decimal and hexadecimal before handing them over to Amy and Fitch respectively, and announcing the commencement of the calculation. Amy stared at the 2 numbers on the paper in a daze, as if she had been given a huge fright. She didn't even pick up her quill. After receiving the question, Fitch began to write on the paper with his quill, and the complex formulas and calculations made everyone feel a little dizzy. A gratified smile appeared on Irma's face as he looked at the 2 contestants sitting back to back. With Fitch's abilities, it'll take him no more than an hour to solve this question. By that time, that little girl will have already fallen asleep while staring at the paper. He's not even moving his quill, looks like he's going to admit defeat right away. He's using his daughter as a shield, how despicable. All of the conservatives heaved a collective sigh of relief upon hearing this. They were initially a little worried that Meg really would be able to raise a little prodigy, but it appeared that their worries were completely unnecessary. There was most likely no one in this world who was more talented than Fitch, and even if there was, it definitely wouldn't be this 3-year-old half-elf. Why isn't she moving her quill? The revolutionaries were also starting to get a little anxious. Meg's decision to send out Amy had already made them very nervous, but Amy's performance was more like a passive competition. How could she possibly be able to calculate properly when she had placed the cat on the table and was staring at the cat? Amy has even learned how to multiply 2-digit numbers. Luna was also looking at Amy with a nervous expression. After all, even for her, it would take at least an entire day to solve a 2-digit hexadecimal multiplication problem. 3 months ago, Amy couldn't even remember numbers. Only 3 months had passed since then, so how could a 3-year-old child have mastered such advanced calculations? Luna's gaze fell on Meg, and she immediately felt a lot more relieved at the sight of the faint smile on his face. That's right. 3 months ago, Amy couldn't even count properly, but 2 months ago, she learned how to multiply single-digit numbers. With Mr. Meg around, it seems that nothing is impossible. A smile reappeared on Luna's face. The entire hall fell completely silent, and the only sound that could be heard was the sound of Fitch's quilt scribbling on a piece of paper. Time seemed to have slowed down to an extremely slow crawl. 16 times 56 is equal to 896, so the answer is 896. Less than half a minute later, Amy suddenly murmured to herself in a low voice. She then grabbed the quill on the table and carefully scribbled down 3 numbers on a piece of paper. She put down the quill and stood up with Ugly Duckling in her arms as she smiled, and said, "I've already calculated the answer. You've lost." Chapter 797. After a brief silence, the entire hall erupted into an uproar. Everyone was unable to disguise their astonishment, and they were almost unable to believe what they had just heard. Fitch has lost. That little girl's calculation was correct. Fitch spent over half an hour to calculate the same answer as that little girl calculated in half a minute. How is that possible? The conservative faction's faces were filled with disbelief. Such a crushing defeat had actually landed on Fitch, who was hailed as the leader of the younger generation. Moreover, his opponent was a little half-elf girl who was only 3 years old. Does that mean we've won? That means that little girl's calculation was correct. She really was able to calculate the correct answer to a 2-digit multiplication problem in half a minute. This is incredible. The decimal system is invincible. All of the revolutionaries faltered momentarily, and they still couldn't believe their eyes. All of a sudden, their extremely disappointed hearts were rekindled, and they were struck by a peculiar feeling. I knew it. Luna jumped with elation, but she quickly realized that her actions were rather unladylike, and a blush appeared on her face as she hurriedly stood still. Thankfully, everyone in the hall was focused on Meg and Amy, so no one had noticed her standing at the entrance of the hall. A smile also appeared on Byron's face as he looked at Meg and Amy with approval in his eyes. As expected, inviting the creator of the Mamie multiplication table to participate in the debate was a good way to break the impasse. That's a man who's willing to admit his loss. Meg looked at Fitch with a hint of surprise and admiration in his eyes. Those so-called prodigies were all very proud and arrogant, yet he was able to publicly admit that he had lost to a 3-year-old child. Furthermore, he didn't express any displeasure or doubt at all, making him appear just like a true man. That's impossible. Alton abruptly rose to his feet, and his confident expression completely changed. He had bet his honor and academic career on this. If Fitch were to lose, then everything would be over. LoveLore. Tell me, what's the result you calculated? It must be different from that little brat's, right? Alton asked as he turned to Leroy with a nervous expression. Everyone in the hall also turned their attention to Roy and Liszt. Fitch had already admitted that Amy's calculation was correct. Now, they only needed to know if their calculations were the same as Fitch's to verify Fitch's words and determine the outcome of this duel. Roy slowly put down his pen, and looked at the final answer on the paper before looking up at Alton with a complex expression. Fitch's answer is correct. My calculations are the same as Fitch's. At this moment, Liszt also put down the quill in his hand and looked at Meg and Amy in his arms, his eyes full of admiration and admiration. How is this possible? Alton stumbled, and almost fell to the ground. He rushed over to Leroy's table and grabbed the piece of paper on the table. After looking at the final calculations on the paper, his legs gave out from under him, and he fell to the ground with a deathly pale face. The entire hall fell silent, and all of the conservative faction members wore extremely strained expressions. With Roy's status, something that could be easily verified like this couldn't be faked. Otherwise, if news of this were to spread, it would deal a fatal blow to his reputation. The three of them had verified the results, so there was no doubt about the outcome of this duel. Amy had calculated the answer at a terrifying speed of half a minute, crushing the prodigy Fitch, who was hailed as Irma's successor, to clinch the victory. Contestant Amy is the victor of this duel. The MC stepped forward and pointed at Amy. She won. The revolutionaries erupted into raucous cheers. They had been completely dominated in 10 consecutive debates, only to make a comeback in the final duel. Through the miraculous performances of this father-daughter duo, they had managed to turn the tables. This feeling of coming back from the jaws of death was simply too heart-wrenching. Calculating a 2-digit multiplication in half a minute can no longer be described as a prodigy, she's a freak. Most importantly, half a minute doesn't seem to be her limit. According to Mr. Meg, if Amy had used a quill to calculate, she would have done it in less than half a minute. She's so awesome. Could it be that Mr. Meg has even come up with a 2-digit multiplication table? If we learn it, will we also be able to calculate it so quickly? Aside from the raucous cheers, all of the revolutionaries were also discussing quietly among themselves. They had initially been quite skeptical about whether the decimal system and the multiplication table were worth upholding, but after witnessing Amy's fearsome calculation prowess, all of their doubts were dispelled. Now, all of their minds were filled with reverence for Meg and anticipation for their own futures. The research on the hexadecimal system had already reached a stalemate in the field of mathematics, and they would never be ranked in the top echelon of mathematics. However, the decimal system was completely different. This was a completely new field, and they were going to be the first batch of researchers to conduct in-depth research into it. From the looks of it, there was a very high chance that the decimal system would replace the hexadecimal system. These 10 debates were most likely going to go down in the annals of mathematics in the history of the Roth Empire. In particular, this final debate could very well be the key to reversing the course of the Roth Empire's decimal system. Mr. Meg and his daughter, who had come up with the Mamie multiplication table, were destined to leave their mark in the annals of mathematics. Byron stood up and turned to Irma and the others with a smile as he said, "Seeing as the outcome of this debate has been decided, then our agreement will naturally take effect. From this day forth, the conservatives are not allowed to interfere with the revolutionaries' promotion of the decimal system for any reason. The Ministry of Education will be supervising this matter, so I hope none of you will do anything that violates the agreement. Rest assured, Master Byron. We agreed to this agreement, so of course we won't go back on our word." Irma's expression darkened as he slowly rose to his feet. He turned to Meg and said, "However, I wonder if those scholars will still be willing to learn and promote this so-called multiplication table after learning that it was invented by a chef." Meg looked at Irma with a hint of mockery in his eyes as he said, "The hexadecimal system was most likely invented by a chef who lived in a cave, but aren't all of you still treating it like a treasure? On top of that, the text was originally scribbled on stone walls. Are you going to abandon the use of text just because your ancestor was a primitive man? Humph. You sure have a sharp tongue." Irma's expression darkened as he strode out of the hall. Roy took a meaningful glance at Meg before also standing up and departing. 2 young scholars helped Irma to his feet before walking past Meg and the others with their heads lowered. "Sir, I hope you still remember what you just said. Tell everyone the good news of your retirement as soon as possible," Meg added with a smile. "You." Irma's eyes widened before he fainted on the spot. "Mr. Meg, right? Can I learn the decimal system from you?" Chapter 798. Everyone who was making their way toward the entrance of the palace turned to look at Fitch with incredulity in their eyes. As Irma's favorite disciple, Fitch had always been groomed by Irma as his successor. With the support of Irma, the #1 arithmetical prodigy in the Roth Empire, Fitch's future was limitless. He was going to be the brightest star in the academic world, and he was going to have the support of countless others. However, such an enviable young man was now going to learn the decimal system from Meg. Meg and his daughter had just given the conservative faction a resounding slap to the face, yet Fitch was going to join them in the blink of an eye. This was no different from destroying one's own future. In the world of arithmetic in the Roth Empire, anyone who offended Irma and the others would never be able to rise again, as there would be countless pairs of feet waiting to trample on them. Aside from surprise, the conservative faction was also enraged. Fitch's actions were tantamount to betrayal, and they were unable to accept this. Even the revolutionaries were looking at Fitch with perplexed expressions. The revolutionaries had won some ground due to Meg and his daughter, but the hexadecimal system had been prevalent in the human race for several decades, so the decimal system was definitely going to take some time to popularize. Was Fitch really going to give up on his bright future? Irma, who had just reached the entrance of the palace, harumphed coldly before exiting without even looking back. His academic career is over. The conservative faction looked at Fitch with wistful expressions before also exiting the palace. Some of them were even gloating over his misfortune. Meg looked at Fitch for a while before shaking his head, and saying, "I'm sorry, but I don't accept students. If you want to learn arithmetic, you can look for Master Byron. He's more professional than I am. I'm just a chef who doesn't know arithmetic." Fitch shook his head with a firm expression as he said, "No, I just want to learn from you. I want to learn the method she used to calculate a 2-digit multiplication in less than half a minute. I don't care what my master does or who he is. Knowledge doesn't change because of people. What feels different is the human heart." Meg looked at Fitch's determined expression and pure eyes, and was silent for a while before shaking his head. "I'm not taking any disciples. I'm going back to Chaos City tomorrow. If you really want to learn the decimal system and multiplication, you can join the revolutionaries. If you have any questions, you can write to me." "Deal." Fitch's eyes lit up as he bowed deeply towards Meg. A smile appeared on Meg's face as he nodded. "It's a deal." Fitch turned around and walked towards Byron, humbly conversing with him. He could tell that Byron was in a good mood. "Father, didn't Amy do a great job?" Amy raised her little head, her little face full of praise. Meg smiled and nodded. "Yes, Xiaomi did very well. Her arithmetic is already better than those old grandpas." "That's right. Little Amy beat the best arithmetic prodigy in Rhoda today." "You did very well." Luna made her way over to Amy, and gave her a thumbs up. Hee hee. Amy was elated to be praised by both Meg and Luna. She swung Meg's arm from side to side, and whispered into his ear, "Father, put me down. I'm going to play hide and seek with Ugly Duckling over there. I won't disturb your conversation with Teacher Luna." Meg didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he put Amy down onto the ground. He didn't know what she was thinking. Luna took a glance at Fitch before turning to Meg with a smile, and said, "Fitch is an extremely talented person. Aren't you going to consider taking him as your disciple?" Meg shook his head with a smile, and said, "I'm a chef, not a teacher. If he's a cooking prodigy, perhaps I'll consider it." Luna couldn't help but chuckle, and said, "It's a good thing you didn't say that in front of them. Otherwise, there would definitely be a lot of people who would want to beat you up." Meg's sharp words had slightly upended his gentle and kind image in her heart, but that didn't make her feel uncomfortable in the slightest. Instead, she felt as if she was getting to know him better. A man like that made her feel more secure. Meg chatted with Luna for a while longer about promoting the decimal system, and he turned around to discover that Amy had disappeared. He hurriedly apologized to Luna before quickly making his way toward the place where Amy had been playing. After circling around the stone pillars, Meg was still unable to find Amy, and he was starting to get a little panicked. There's a door here. Could Amy have gone out through here? Luna was also looking around anxiously when she suddenly discovered a small door that was slightly ajar on the side of the hall. She turned to Meg with a question. I'll go take a look. Meg quickly made his way over to the small door, which was just wide enough for Amy and Ugly Duckling to pass through. She couldn't be found anywhere in the hall, so it was most likely that she had chased Ugly Duckling out through this small door. After exiting the hall through the side door, they were greeted by the sight of a cluster of domed buildings. Evergreen trees littered the halls, and there was not a single person in sight. Amy! Amy! Meg yelled as he looked around. There were simply too many buildings and trees here, and if Amy were to get lost, she would definitely panic. Furthermore, if something were to happen to her, he wouldn't be able to get there immediately, and that made him feel very uneasy. Don't worry, Mr. Meg. The church's priests are all kind and gentle people, and little Amy is so smart. She'll be fine. Luna followed him out of the hall. She looked at the nervous Meg and consoled him, let's look around first. If we still can't find her, I'll ask grandfather to negotiate with the church and ask them to help us find her. All right. Meg nodded. He walked in a direction and scanned his surroundings with a sharp gaze. At the same time, he said in his mind, System, locate Amy for me. My apologies, host. The system doesn't provide personal location services. The system's old-fashioned voice sounded, but it quickly turned into a playful one. However, the system can provide you with a location watch service. Worried that your child will get lost? Worried that you won't be able to find your child? Don't worry. Little Genius Phone Watch will solve all your problems. No matter where you are, I can find you immediately with just a phone call. Hello. I can find you with just a phone call. I can find you with just a phone call. Scram. Meg's brows were tightly knitted together as he listened to the repeated advertisements in his mind. After looking around for more than 10 minutes and going through several halls, Meg still couldn't find Amy, and his expression became even more serious. Why don't? Luna also looked a little anxious, and she walked up to him and was about to say something. Meow, just then, a soft meow of a cat came from the side. It's Ugly Duckling. Meg's gaze immediately turned to the majestic hall on his right. The thick wooden door, which was 5 or 6 meters tall, was tightly shut, but he was sure that the meow of the cat had come from there. Meg quickly walked up and pushed open the 2 thick doors. He looked inside and was stunned. Chapter 799. The heavy wooden door slowly opened inward, and a dimly lit hall gradually unfolded before Meg's eyes. In the deepest part of the hall, an old man with a crown on his head sat on a tall chair. A huge diamond-studded scepter shone brightly in his hand, evoking reverence and even an urge to kneel down and worship him. Walking down the gem-studded stone steps, there was a small figure standing in the center of the hall. A beam of light shone down from the dome and landed on her body. The specks of light shone brightly, as if covering her with a layer of golden gauze. That little figure was none other than Amy, whom Meg had been looking for a long time, but he didn't know why she was here. It's His Holiness. He won't hurt Amy, Luna said softly as she held back Meg, who was about to enter the hall. Meg hesitated momentarily before stopping in his tracks. He looked at the old man sitting on the throne like a statue, and his benevolent face made one feel defenseless against him. His light blue eyes were fixed on Amy as if he were looking at a dazzling diamond. What is he trying to do? Meg was still a little wary. This Pope, Kant, had killed 2 generations of kings of the Roth Empire, and watched the church fall from prosperity to decline, but he had always kept the church in check, and had never shown any hostility or retaliation. However, when it came to Amy, he still couldn't completely trust him. Under the illumination of the golden light, Amy reached out her little hand curiously. She looked at the golden light in her hand, and a joyful smile appeared on her little face. Specks of golden light began to converge on her back, forming a pair of semi-transparent golden wings. With a gentle flap, Amy's legs left the ground, and she hovered in the air. "Wow! I can fly!" Amy exclaimed in surprise. She tried to control the flapping of her wings, and her body flew higher and higher. Although it was still a little unstable, she was indeed flying. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling looked up at Amy with a panicked expression as it waved its front paws with all its might, as if it were trying to fly. This light. Meg looked at Amy in surprise. There were some races in this world that could fly, such as vampires, but normal elves were definitely not included. Unless they could use magic to create wings, or they could borrow some magic items such as brooms and the like. However, there was absolutely no elf that could create a pair of wings out of thin air to fly without using magic. Then, the only possibility was that the beam of light that fell on Amy was still following Amy like a spotlight even when she was flying. However, Amy, who was flapping her little wings, still looked very cute. She was like a little flower fairy, and the holy light that shone on her made people unable to look away. The chosen one. She really is the chosen one. I really didn't think. The Pope looked up at Amy, who was dancing in the golden light, and a hint of excitement appeared in his calm and wise eyes. Oh ho! Amy flapped her little wings and flew in the spacious palace. After a while, she suddenly discovered Meg and Luna standing at the entrance of the palace. She was immediately pleasantly surprised. "Father! Teacher Luna! Look, I can fly!" Meg smiled and waved at Amy. "Amy, come down first." Amy responded obediently, and controlled her wings to fly toward Meg. However, she didn't control her speed well during her descent, and fell when she was about 2 meters off the ground. Fortunately, Meg reacted quickly and caught her. "Hee, I knew Father would catch me." A happy smile appeared on Amy's face. She turned her head and looked behind her. Her little golden wings were still there, and her smile became even brighter. She then said to the Pope, who was sitting high up on the throne, "Shiny old Grandpa, I really have a pair of little wings now. Thank you. You were chosen by God. If you want to thank someone, you should be thanking God." The Pope looked at Amy with a smile, and said, "Little one, are you willing to join our church and become the church's holy maiden? If you are willing, you can be crowned as the Empress in the future and become the owner of this palace." Luna's mouth gradually gaped open. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The Pope wanted Amy to become the holy maiden, and was preparing to make her the next Pope. This was crazy. Meg also couldn't hide the shock on his face. Amy had only played hide and seek, and the Pope had chosen her to become the holy maiden, and she was going to be the next Pope. Even for someone like him who had seen the world, this development was a little difficult to digest. Although the church was no longer as powerful and influential as it used to be, it still had a strong influence among the upper echelons of the Roth Empire. Even when André ascended to the throne, he had to kneel on the ground and kiss the back of the Pope's hand. Only then would he be crowned as the true king. However, the Pope had promised such a position in the Roth Empire to Amy so easily. This was like a dream. Before Meg had a chance to think, Amy shook her head at the Pope with a serious expression, and said, "I'm sorry, shiny old Grandpa. I don't like to sit so high up, and this palace is a little dark, so I don't want this seat. I want to live in the restaurant with Father. That way, I can eat all kinds of delicious food when I wake up every day." An opportunity to stand at the pinnacle of the continent had been so easily turned down by Amy with the excuse of delicious food. This feeling was as if a bowl of sweet tofu pudding was more worthy of her affection than the Pope. Fortunately, there was no one else here. Otherwise, Meg would have to be very careful and on guard against sneak attacks from jealous passers-by. The Pope was also clearly stunned. He clearly didn't think that someone would refuse to become the Pope, and use such a reason. He looked at Amy's serious expression and smiled gently as he said, "If you become the Pope, you will have a lot of power. No one on the Norland continent will be able to hurt you or the people you want to protect. Of course, you can also eat whatever you want. Someone will prepare everything for you. But I only want to eat Father's food. I only want to live with Father. I don't want to live with anyone else." Amy shook her head and said, "Besides, I'm super powerful now. I'll definitely be able to protect Father in the future." Meg felt that if this conversation were to spread, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. After all, no one in this world would reject the Pope's invitation and the opportunity to become the Pope for such a reason. This was indeed very crazy. Chapter 800. The Pope looked at Amy, his clear and wise eyes full of admiration and praise. He was not the slightest bit displeased by Amy's rejection. "Yes, even if you don't become a divine lady, you will still become an extraordinary person and protect your father well." The Pope looked at Amy with a smile and paused for a moment before continuing, "But if you become the Pope, you will be able to protect all kind-hearted humans and give them shelter." Kind-hearted humans. A thoughtful look appeared on Amy's face. After thinking for a while, she looked up at the Pope and asked, "But have you protected them?" The smile on the Pope's face gradually faded, and he looked at Amy with a deep gaze. When did this little one become so crafty with her questions? Meg looked at Amy with some surprise, and his eyes were full of admiration. Being able to see if there was something strange hidden in the pie that someone threw at her was undoubtedly a very good ability. However, Meg looked at the Pope with some caution. Although the Pope, who was known for being a good person, had not shown any hostility from beginning to end, no one could guarantee that he would not fly into a rage out of humiliation after hearing Amy's question. This was because the current church clearly had no ability to protect kind-hearted people. What they needed to worry about now was how to protect the last remaining Carlow Cathedral. Luna also had a worried look on her face. Although the church was declining, she had never heard any stories about the church from her grandfather when she was young. Even her grandfather would bow respectfully when he saw the Pope. This was an old man who was respected by many people. The Pope was silent for a while, and then he looked at Amy and said in a slightly low voice, "I used to work hard to protect them, but one day, I realized that what I did was instead causing them more harm or bringing them more pain. So, I chose to become a bystander and not let the church get too involved in the lives of ordinary people. If your help causes them more pain, then it must be because you did not find the right way to help them. You can't say that helping them is wrong. You should correct your methods and not choose to run away." Amy frowned and said sympathetically, "If those kind people pray for your help but you don't care about them, wouldn't that be very cruel to them?" The Pope's eyes gradually lit up. He stood up unconsciously and raised his head slightly to look at the dome that cast golden light. His eyes flickered a little. "Father, did I say something wrong?" Amy whispered in Meg's ear. Meg shook her head and said with a smile, "No, Amy said it very well. If it were anyone else here, they probably wouldn't be able to say such words to the Pope." The Pope withdrew his gaze from the dome and looked down at Amy. He asked kindly, "Young lady, what's your name?" "Amy," Amy answered crisply. "Amy, whether you're willing or not, the position of goddess will always be reserved for you. If you're willing to join the church one day, I'll crown you as the queen." The Pope looked out of the palace with a sharp gaze, and said with a smile, "As for me, it's time for the church to do what it needs to do again. Amy turned to look at the pair of faint golden wings on her back, and asked with a conflicted expression, "What about these wings? If I refuse, do I have to return them to you?" She really liked the feeling of flying, and it didn't require any magic power. This feeling was simply too interesting. The Pope shook his head with a smile, and said, "This is a blessing from God, and only God can take it back. You're God's chosen one, and God won't make the wrong choice." A joyful smile appeared on Amy's face. "Wow, then you have to thank God for me. I really like these wings." The Pope nodded with a smile before sitting back down. Meg and Luna bowed respectfully toward the Pope before carrying Amy and Ugly Duckling out of the palace. The heavy wooden door slowly closed behind them, and the intricate wooden carvings on the door gave off a sense of solemnity. Amy said to Meg before flapping her wings and flying out of Meg's arms. She flew through the trees in a nimble manner, and her two little silver braids swayed gently from side to side. Her tinkling laughter rang out throughout the entire church. Many of the preachers made their way over to the window to look at Amy and the pair of little golden wings on her back with astonishment in their eyes. Some of the older preachers were unable to hide their excitement as they clasped their hands together and prayed softly. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling ran on the ground, trying its best to catch up to Amy. "Ugly Duckling, do you want to come up and play as well?" Amy suddenly stopped in mid-air and looked down at Ugly Duckling with a smile. Meow. Ugly Duckling was given a fright, and it slipped and fell headfirst into a pile of dried leaves. Its entire head was buried in the leaves, and it remained in that position. "It's useless even if you pretend to be dead." A demonic voice sounded in its ears, and Ugly Duckling tried its best to bury its head deeper into the leaves. It was like an ostrich that had stuffed its head into the sand with its butt exposed. It was then dragged out of the pile of leaves by Amy. Amy held Ugly Duckling in front of her and looked at it with a serious expression as she said, "Even though you're an ugly duckling now, you have to remember that you're going to become a white swan in the future. If you're afraid of heights, then do you want to become a white swan that runs on the ground?" Meow, meow, Ugly Duckling blinked its big blue eyes with an aggrieved expression. Tears were already welling up in its eyes, making it look like a scared little child. "Good luck, you can do it." Amy rubbed its little cat head before flapping her little wings, and she instantly flew higher into the air. Meow. Howl. Meg looked at Ugly Duckling, which was crying out in a husky voice, and was struck by a sense of pity and amusement. He couldn't help but think to himself, could it be that Ugly Duckling is also a husky like Little Purple? After letting Amy play for a while, Meg saw that more and more preachers were paying attention to Amy, so he waved a hand at Amy, and said, "Come down, Amy. We have to go." Amy dove down from the sky with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and she landed right into Meg's arms. The vibrant smile on her face was a stark contrast to the tear-stained Ugly Duckling. Howl. Meow. Ugly Duckling opened its eyes and looked at Amy with an aggrieved expression. "Well done, Ugly Duckling. I'll take you to the sky every day from now on." Amy patted Ugly Duckling's head with a smile. Meow. Chapter 801. The Pope looked at Amy, his clear and wise eyes full of admiration and praise. He was not the slightest bit displeased by Amy's rejection. "Yes, even if you don't become a divine lady, you will still become an extraordinary person and protect your father well." The Pope looked at Amy with a smile and paused for a moment before continuing, "But if you become the Pope, you will be able to protect all kind-hearted humans and give them shelter." Kind-hearted humans. A thoughtful look appeared on Amy's face. After thinking for a while, she looked up at the Pope and asked, "But have you protected them?" The smile on the Pope's face gradually faded, and he looked at Amy with a deep gaze. When did the little one become so crafty with her questions? Meg looked at Amy with some surprise, and his eyes were full of admiration. Being able to see if there were any strange things hidden in the pie that others threw at her was undoubtedly a very good ability. However, Meg looked at the Pope with some caution. Although the Pope, who was known for being a good person, had not shown any hostility from beginning to end, no one could guarantee that he would not fly into a rage out of humiliation after hearing Amy's question. This was because the current church clearly had no ability to protect kind-hearted people. What they needed to worry about now was how to protect the last remaining Carlo Cathedral. Luna also had a worried expression on her face. Although the church was declining, she had never heard any stories about the church from her grandfather when she was young. Even her grandfather would bow respectfully when he saw the Pope. This was an old man who was respected by many people. The Pope was silent for a while, then looked at Amy and said in a slightly low voice, "I used to work hard to protect them, but one day, I realized that what I did was instead causing them more harm or bringing them more pain. So, I chose to become a bystander and not let the church get too involved in the lives of ordinary people. If your help causes them more pain, then it must be because you did not find the right way. You can't say that helping them is wrong. You should correct your methods and not choose to run away." Amy frowned and said sympathetically, "If those kind people pray for your help but you don't care about them, wouldn't that be very cruel to them?" The Pope's eyes gradually lit up. He stood up unconsciously and raised his head slightly to look at the dome that was casting golden light. His eyes flickered. "Father, did I say something wrong?" Amy whispered in Meg's ear. Meg shook her head and said with a smile, "No, Amy said it very well. If it were anyone else here, they probably wouldn't be able to say such words to the Pope." The Pope withdrew his gaze from the dome and looked down at Amy. He asked kindly, "Young lady, what's your name?" "Amy," Amy answered crisply. "Amy, whether you're willing or not, the position of goddess will always be reserved for you. If you're willing to join the church one day, I'll crown you as the queen." The Pope looked out of the palace with a sharp gaze, and said with a smile, "As for me, it's time for the church to do what it needs to do again." Amy turned to look at the pair of faint golden wings on her back, and asked with a conflicted expression, "What about these wings? If I refuse, do I have to return them to you?" She really liked the feeling of flying, and it didn't require any magic power. This feeling was simply too interesting. The Pope shook his head with a smile, and said, "This is a blessing from God, and only God can take it back. You're God's chosen one, and God won't make the wrong choice." A joyful smile appeared on Amy's face. "Wow, then you have to thank God for me. I really like these wings." The Pope nodded with a smile before sitting back down. Meg and Luna bowed respectfully to the Pope before carrying Amy and Ugly Duckling out of the palace. The heavy wooden door slowly closed behind them, and the intricate wooden carvings on the door gave off a sense of solemnity. Amy said to Meg before flapping her wings and flying out of Meg's arms. She flew through the trees in a nimble manner, and her two little silver braids swayed gently as her tinkling laughter rang out throughout the entire church. Many of the preachers made their way to the window and looked at Amy and the pair of golden wings on her back with astonishment in their eyes. Some of the older preachers were unable to hide their excitement as they clasped their hands together and prayed softly. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling ran on the ground, trying its best to catch up to Amy. "Ugly Duckling, do you want to come up and play as well?" Amy suddenly stopped in mid-air and looked down at Ugly Duckling with a smile. Meow. Ugly Duckling was given a fright, and it slipped and fell headfirst into a pile of dried leaves. Its entire head was buried in the leaves, and it remained in that position. "It's useless even if you play dead." A demonic voice sounded in its ears, and Ugly Duckling tried its best to burrow its head deeper into the leaves. It was like an ostrich that had stuffed its head into the sand with its butt exposed. It was then dragged out of the pile of leaves by Amy. Amy held Ugly Duckling up to her with a serious expression as she said, "Even though you're an ugly duckling now, you have to remember that you're going to become a white swan in the future. If you're afraid of heights, then do you want to become a white swan that runs on the ground?" Meow, meow, Ugly Duckling blinked its big blue eyes with an aggrieved expression. Tears were already welling up in its eyes, making it look like a scared little child. "Good luck, you can do it." Amy rubbed its little cat head before flapping her little wings, and she instantly flew higher into the air. Meow. Howl. Meg looked at Ugly Duckling, which was crying out in a husky voice, and was struck by a sense of pity and amusement. He couldn't help but think to himself, could it be that Ugly Duckling is also a husky like Little Purple? After letting Amy play for a while, Meg saw that more and more preachers were paying attention to Amy, so he waved a hand at Amy, and said, "Come down, Amy. We have to go." Amy dove down from the sky with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and she landed right into Meg's arms. The vibrant smile on her face was a stark contrast to Ugly Duckling's tear-stained eyes. Howl. Meow. Ugly Duckling opened its eyes and looked at Amy with an aggrieved expression. "Well done, Ugly Duckling. I'll take you to the sky every day from now on." Amy patted Ugly Duckling's head with a smile. Meow. Chapter 802. After touring the entire food street for the entire afternoon, Meg and Amy stroked their slightly round bellies as they boarded the horse-drawn carriage. Meg had given Cindy a handwritten roast beef recipe. He had watched Cindy cook roast beef for the entire afternoon, and this detailed recipe included everything from sauces to heat control. How much Cindy would be able to master and what kind of roast beef he would be able to cook would depend on his talent and hard work. As for the reason why he had taken back his restaurant, it was very simple. It was because he cherished his reputation. Cindy was indeed an interesting person, but Meg was already very generous of him to have given him a complete recipe, so there was no need to give him his signature. If Cindy's roast beef kebabs were to his liking the next time he came to Rodu, perhaps he would consider giving him a name. The horse-drawn carriage passed by Carrie's rotisserie, only to find that Cindy's cart had already disappeared. Who knew how long it would take for Carrie's rotisserie to recover its popularity, or for Cindy's rotisserie to continue its decline? The atmosphere in the second prince's manor was still very tense. The horse-drawn carriage entered the manor through the side gate, and Meg had only just disembarked when the butler rushed over to him with a wide smile on his face. "Master Meg, you're finally back. His Highness is still waiting for you to cook dinner." "His Highness hasn't eaten yet." Meg was rather surprised to hear this, but he was cursing internally. He had purposely missed dinner time before returning, and it was already dark in Rodu. Who would have thought that Josh would still be waiting for him to cook dinner for him? "Indeed, His Highness has specifically instructed us to only eat your cooking tonight, but you still haven't returned, and we almost went out to look for you." The butler nodded with a hint of resentment in his voice as he accepted the gift from Meg's hands. "Master Meg, I'll hold the gift for you. Let's go to the kitchen now." "All right." Meg nodded. It seemed that he had to leave a deep impression on Joshua on the last night. "By the way, Master Meg, the second prince said that we won't be eating spicy grilled fish today. We'll only be eating other dishes," the steward added as he followed behind Meg. "That's such a pity." Meg looked regretful. Meg made a braised chicken and rice as well as a black pepper steak for Meg. He then gestured for the maid to bring the dishes away. He took off his apron, and was just about to call for Amy, who was playing with Ugly Duckling at the entrance of the kitchen when the butler from before quickly strode in from outside. He looked at Meg, and said, "Master Meg, the second prince wants to see you. Please come with me." Meg's expression stiffened slightly, and he quickly nodded as he replied, "All right." He followed the butler into an elegant restaurant not far away from the kitchen, where Josh was eating a steak. It had only been a day since they last met, but he appeared to have aged significantly. His face was a little pale, and there was a short stubble on his chin. His hair was disheveled, and his dark eye sockets suggested that he hadn't closed them yet. There was also a faint knife wound on his neck. If it weren't for the lavish robes he was wearing, Josh would have looked like a drunken vagrant under a bridge, and he was wolfing down his steak in a rather ravenous manner. Josh's knife and fork paused upon hearing the sound of footsteps. He looked up at Meg, and a slightly dazed expression appeared on his face. He seemed to have caught sight of the black figure who was swinging his sword toward him, and he immediately tightened his grip on the knife in his hand. His gaze fell on Meg's smiling face, and he hesitated momentarily before putting down the knife in his hand. Josh looked at Meg, and nodded as he said, "Master Meg, you won the Best Dish Award at the Royal Banquet yesterday, and your culinary skills are unrivaled in the world. However, are you sure you don't want to stay in Rodu, Mr. Meg? Even if you don't work in my manor, I can open a restaurant in Rodu that's twice the size of the one in Chaos City for you." Meg shook his head, and replied, "Thank you for your kind offer, Your Highness, but I'm very attached to my restaurant. I boldly turned down Your Majesty's offer in the palace yesterday, so I can only thank you for your kind offer." Josh stared at Meg for a while before withdrawing his gaze with a smile, and said, "All right, even Father can't keep you here, let alone me. It's just a pity that I won't be able to taste such delicious steak in the future. However, I'll leave this position open for you. If you want to come to Rodu, just let me know, and I'll be able to arrange everything for you. Then I'll thank you right here, Your Highness." Meg nodded with a smile. His expression hadn't changed much this entire time. "You're going back to Chaos City tomorrow, so go back and get some rest." Josh picked up his knife and fork again, and continued to eat his steak. "Farewell." Meg cupped his fist in a salute, and took a discreet glance at the curtain before departing. Not long after Meg left, two black figures quickly strode into the room. "Your Highness, we didn't find anything suspicious in Meg's room, nor did we find the Tiandu sword," one of the black-robed men said in a respectful manner as he half knelt on the ground. "Your Highness, according to reliable intelligence, Meg's identity has been verified. His real name is Noah Gould. The Gould family used to be a small noble family, and their ancestors were once chefs for the late emperor. However, they gradually declined, and by Noah Gould's generation, they had already lost their noble title. 5 years ago, an elf became enemies with Timothy of the Barclay family, resulting in the destruction of the Barclay family. Meg fled from Rodu with that elf. It said that the elf was pregnant at the time, and judging from her age, she should be around the same age as Mag's daughter. Perhaps Mag is concealing his age in order to avoid his enemies, another black-robed man quickly added. Is the information accurate? Josh's brows furrowed tightly as he continued to recall that sword strike from the night before. The information from Chaos City matches as well, so there shouldn't be any issues, the black-robed man replied in a firm voice. The Barclay family. Timothy. He really is a smart man. He knew that even if he entered the royal palace, he wouldn't be able to defeat Timothy, so he chose to escape again. A cold smile appeared on Josh's face. The black-robed man said in a quiet voice, "Your Highness, seeing as we were able to find out his identity, there should be many people in Rodu who can do the same. Should we protect him?" "Protect him? Ha!" A cold smile appeared on Josh's face as he said, "Deliver this news to young Master Timothy as soon as possible. Let him know that the man who stole his woman is still alive, and that he has an adorable daughter." The black-robed man was a little perplexed, but he still replied in a respectful manner, "Yes." Chapter 803. System, the little genius phone watch you mentioned earlier today, are you sure it can accurately locate me? After coaxing Amy to sleep, Meg laid on his bed and asked the system in his mind. "Host, didn't you tell me to scram? the system said with a hint of resentment. Are you selling it? If not, then forget it. Of course. Of course I'm selling it. No matter where you are, I can find you with just a phone call. The little genius phone watch, compared to ordinary phone watches, has been optimized and upgraded by the system. It is waterproof, fire-resistant, and has strong resistance to pressure. It can deal with any irresistible factors and supports accurate positioning within a 30 km radius. At the same time, this phone watch supports real-time communication. However, each phone watch can only correspond to one smart terminal, and this smart terminal has to be purchased separately. The system was like a professional salesman, speaking rapidly. How much is it? Meg raised an eyebrow. The incident at the church today made Meg feel a sense of crisis. Getting a GPS watch was obviously a good choice. Because the system needs to provide real-time location information as an additional service, the price of the little genius phone watch is 1 million copper coins. If the host wants to purchase another smart terminal, the cost will be 50,000 copper coins, for a total of 1.05 million copper coins. I'll take one set. I want the purple one for Amy. Meg said without hesitation. Ding. 1.05 million copper coins have been deducted. Ding. The little genius phone watch is being customized. It can be delivered in 3 minutes. Ding. Wireless communication system is being constructed. Required time is 5 minutes. The system's cheerful voice sounded. 3 minutes passed quickly. According to Meg's request, 2 small boxes appeared on the table. Meg got up and walked to the table. There were 2 boxes, one big and one small. The small box was decorated with colorful patterns and small flowers, while the big box was pitch black. Meg picked up the small box. It was very light in his hands. He opened the box, and there was a purplish gold watch inside. It was exquisitely carved, and its surface shone like a gemstone. It was exquisite and dazzling. It didn't look like a watch, but more like a beautiful bracelet. Amy should like it, right? A smile appeared on Meg's face. $1 million watch was not expensive to him, and spending it on Amy didn't cause him any heartache. After closing the box, Meg opened the other box, and there was a black pager lying inside. System, are you trying to fool me with something like this for 50,000 yuan? Meg picked up a retro-looking machine from the box and couldn't help but roll his eyes. Host, this is the latest retro style. It's made of ceramic and has an excellent texture. Apart from the control function, it also supports a touchscreen mode. It has both positioning and communication functions. It's the best configuration for the little genius phone watch. Meg picked up the manual at the side and glanced at it a few times. Then, he turned on the computer. The black and white screen was quite clear. After the network was successfully built, the 2 computers were successfully connected. After clicking on the positioning function, a small red dot did appear in the middle of the screen, and there were directions and distance notifications. Although he couldn't understand the aesthetics and trends of the system, Meg was quite satisfied with the performance of the machine. He kicked the black pager into the side pocket of his shirt. He was going to carry it with him everywhere in the future. The next day, Meg woke up early in the morning and helped Amy change her clothes. Then, he tidied up everything. Only then did he take out the small purple box from his pocket. He smiled at Amy and said, "Amy, Father has a gift for you." "What is it?" Amy looked at the beautiful purple box in Meg's hand, her little face full of anticipation. "It's a watch that allows you to talk to Father from afar." Meg gently opened the box. "Wow! What a beautiful watch. It's purple and sparkling." Amy looked at the sparkling watch in the box, and her eyes seemed to sparkle. Meg took out the watch and put it on Amy's hand. The purple and gold chain was very thin, and the size of the gemstone mirror was just right. It fit perfectly on Amy's delicate little hand. He smiled and said, "Do you like it?" "Yes, yes. Amy loves it." Amy raised her little hand high and waved it left and right, looking at the light reflected by the gemstone. Her face was full of smiles, but she also looked at Meg curiously and said, "But, Father, did you say that this watch allows me to talk to you from afar?" "Yes. If Amy encounters any danger, or if you miss Father, you can turn this small button, and Father will be able to talk to you through this watch." Meg pointed at the small buttons on the side of the watch to Amy. At the same time, he took out his pager. "Like this." And then Amy turned it curiously, and the pager in Meg's hand immediately rang. Meg pressed the answer button, and Amy's voice sounded from the terminal. "Wow, that's amazing." Amy's mouth opened slightly, and she looked at the terminal in Meg's hand in amazement. "All right, we have to get ready to go home." Meg hung up with a smile, patted Amy's hair, and then carried her out of the door. Along the way, Amy studied her new watch, and asked Meg all kinds of questions. Meg enjoyed the little one's admiring gaze, and he naturally answered all of her questions, taking all of the credit for the system. The horse-drawn carriage from the second prince's residence sent Meg, Amy, and all of the kitchen utensils they had brought with them out of the city. When they arrived, Crassus and Novin just so happened to have alighted from a horse-drawn carriage. A huge white flying magic beast was lying on the ground, and there were many people carrying things onto it. Teacher Crassus. Principal. Amy waved her little hands at Crassus and Novin as she greeted them. Master Crassus, Principal. Meg walked over with Amy in his arms, and also greeted them with a smile. Little Amy. Crassus greeted Amy with a smile, and then looked at Meg, and said, "I was worried that Josh would ask you to stay, but the scene 2 nights ago must have given him quite a fright, so I don't think he's in the mood to do something like that." Meg was naturally aware of what had happened 2 nights ago. That sword had almost severed Josh's head, and judging from his appearance yesterday, he was indeed given quite a fright. However, he still smiled, and said, "I even rejected the king's invitation, so I'm sure he knows he can't keep me." Mr. Mac is really interesting. Crassus laughed. Novin also smiled at Meg, and said, "Mr. Meg, I welcome you on behalf of Chaos City for rejecting the king's invitation and choosing to return to Chaos City. Chaos City is the most interesting place, isn't it?" Meg shrugged, and the 3 of them laughed at the same time. Chapter 804. Father, I remember that uncle who loves to eat roast beef said he was going to go back to Chaos City with us, right? Where is he? Amy looked around with a curious expression as they rode on the bird's broad back. Crap. Meg raised an eyebrow upon hearing this. If Amy hadn't brought it up, he really would have forgotten that Duke Abraham had said that he was going to go to Chaos City with them. He had completely forgotten about it during the past 2 days, and had only remembered to wait for Luna. Meg scratched his nose awkwardly, and said, "Perhaps he forgot as well. I didn't see him at the city gate." Mr. Mac. Mr. Mac. Wait for me. Right at this moment, an urgent voice sounded from behind them. A large black falcon flew up from behind them, flying alongside Mag's bird. On the falcon's back, Duke Abraham was waving his arms in the air as he yelled in an excited manner, "Come on, come on, come on. I was in a hurry to board the plane, so I forgot to wait for you." "I hope you won't blame me for it," Meg said with an apologetic expression. Abraham waved a nonchalant hand, and said, "It's all right, I woke up late. I'd feel bad if I made you wait for me. It's been a long time since I last walked Little Black." Crassus pursed his lips as he looked at the black falcon's misshapen belly, and said, it's such a waste to keep such a good falcon at home like a pig." Meg also took a glance at the black falcon. At first glance, it did indeed appear to be very powerful and majestic, but upon closer inspection, he discovered that its body was indeed a little abnormal under its glossy black feathers. It had lost the streamlined shape of an eagle, and instead looked like an inflated balloon. It looked a little bloated. Although it was flapping its wings with all its might, its heavy breathing made people worry that it would be unable to catch its breath and fall down. An awkward smile appeared on Abraham's face as he said, "Little Black takes after me. It's a blessing to be able to eat well. However, this guy isn't as disciplined as I am, so I brought him out to train." "Ugly duckling, did you see that? It's so fat, yet it can fly so high." "You're so fat and useless," Amy said with a disdainful expression as she rubbed Ugly Duckling's chubby face. "Meow." Ugly Duckling gave a feeble response, but it still refused to open its eyes. The two birds flew side by side for a while. Soon, Abraham's fat Blackie was left behind and could only follow weakly from behind. However, with the pilot and Abraham's guards on the eagle's back, Meg didn't have to worry about his safety. After telling him the restaurant's address, the white bird flapped its wings and left the eagle far behind. Abraham watched the bird disappear into the horizon in the blink of an eye, and said in a meaningful tone, "Blackie, it's time for you to lose some weight." In Amy's restaurant, everyone had also woken up very early. Yabamia, who was wearing a maid's uniform, stuffed a rag into Barbara and Anna's hands, and said with an energetic smile, "Boss and Amy are coming back today. Let's do a thorough cleaning of the restaurant before they come back." "All right, I'll clean the chairs." Anna nodded obediently. If only big sister Aisha was here. She'd be able to clean everything with a single spell. Barbara was wiping the table with a wistful expression. Anna, who was carefully wiping the chairs, stopped what she was doing. She turned to Yabamia, and asked, "Uncle Meg and Amy are both coming back, so when will big sister Aisha and big brother Blower be back?" The smile on Yabamia's face faltered momentarily, but she quickly turned to Anna with a smile, and replied, "Soon. Aisha said that she'll be back for work, so she'll definitely be back soon." "That's great." A smile appeared on Anna's face as she continued to wipe the chairs. "I hope they'll be back soon." Mia looked out the window with a concerned expression. In Chris's blacksmith shop, the blacksmiths were forging in full swing. The red-hot iron pieces were exuding a scorching heat. The blacksmiths were topless as they swung the hammers in their hands, making ear-piercing sounds when they hit the iron pieces. However, the scorching temperatures and ear-piercing sounds didn't seem to affect the sealed room beside the blacksmith shop. Cyril was sitting in a chair with his legs crossed, and a sexy blonde young woman was massaging his shoulders from behind. Her voluptuous breasts would occasionally brush against the back of his head with a contented smile on her face. A middle-aged man with a slightly sinister appearance was standing in front of the table, and he greedily glanced at the young woman before turning to Cyril with a fawning smile, and said, "Young master, as you requested, we've completed all of the orders for this month ahead of schedule, and we've received all of the payment. If we can receive a new batch of orders, we'll also receive a deposit, and the blacksmith shop's income for this month will definitely be higher than that of the suede textiles shop." "Very good." Cyril opened his eyes, and grabbed the young woman's little hand to play with as he turned to the man, and said, "Cree, if I win this time, then she's yours. However, as a safety precaution, use all of your connections to pull in a few more large orders for the blacksmith shop. It's best if you can get them to pay a larger deposit. The more prepared we are, the greater our chances of winning." Cree's eyes immediately lit up, and he swept his lustful gaze over the young woman's body. It was as if he could already envision her beautiful body beneath that tight dress, and her snowy white skin that was as fair as a lamb's. He immediately nodded and said, "Yes, young master, I'll do that right away." Young Master Cyril, how could you give me away to a blacksmith like this? The young woman looked at Cyril with an aggrieved expression, and a hint of fear in her eyes. Don't worry, I'm just trying to appease him. If I don't give him some benefits, he won't work for me wholeheartedly. Someone like him doesn't deserve to touch my woman. A disdainful smile appeared on Cyril's face. Really? A smile reappeared on the young woman's face as she placed her little hand on Cyril's chest again, and began to gently run her fingertips over it. That'll depend on your performance. Cyril pulled the young woman into his arms, and began to roam his hands all over her body. Father, I see Chaos City. Look, that must be the Eden Square, right? Amy pointed down with an excited expression on her face as she stood on the back of the giant white bird. A massive city had already appeared before everyone's eyes. That's right, we're home. A smile also appeared on Meg's face as he cast his gaze toward the southwestern direction, where there was a steep mountain. His gaze paused momentarily before withdrawing. The giant white bird with the city lord's castle crest entered Chaos City without any impediment, and landed on the Eden Square. Big Sister Mia, Big Sister Aisha, Big Sister Barbara, Big Sister Anna. We're back. Chapter 805. Mr. Mac. Little Boss. I missed you guys so much. There was still no response from the restaurant, but Mobai had already rushed out of the blacksmith shop next door with a large hammer in his hand. Amy. Boss. The restaurant's door, which still had a temporarily closed sign hanging on it, was pushed open, and Yabamiya, who was wearing a maid's uniform, was the first to run out with a surprised smile on her face. Her breasts, which were a little out of proportion to her normal figure, rippled slightly as she ran, just like a maid waiting for her master to return home. Looks like Mia is still in her puberty stage. She probably won't be able to wear these clothes for much longer, Meg thought to himself as he looked at the slightly tight clothes for a while. Amy. Anna was the second to run out of the restaurant. She looked at Amy with a happy smile on her exquisite face. Barbara was the last to come out, and she also couldn't hide the surprise in her eyes. However, she appeared to be a little more reserved as she stood at the door and greeted Amy. Little Amy, Mr. Mac, you're finally back. This is great news. Cece walked out of the magic potion shop with a long-necked glass bottle in her hand, and looked at Meg and Amy with surprise. The blue magic potion was swaying slightly in the bottle, and Lulu stood at the blacksmith shop entrance with a silly smile on her face. Big Sister Cece, Big Dumb Bear, Grandpa Mobai, Charcoal, Green Pea, are you all here to welcome me? I'm so happy. Amy waved her little hands at everyone, and the smile on her little face became even more vibrant. Hello, everyone. Meg also greeted everyone with a smile, and then turned around to look at everyone on the back of the giant bird. It just so happens that it's lunchtime now. If you're not in a hurry, perhaps you can all have lunch in the restaurant before going back. I was thinking the same thing. Crassus was the first to respond. Novin hesitated for a moment before standing up with a smile, and said, I'll have to trouble you then, Mr. Meg. Amy threw herself into Mia's arms and turned around to wave at Luna, saying, Teacher Luna, come quickly. Father is going to make us something delicious. Luna smiled embarrassedly and said, Then I'll be thick-skinned and freeload another meal. Meg asked the beast tamer in charge of riding the white bird to have lunch with him. Only then did he dismount from the horse and nimbly avoid Mobai, who wanted to give him a bear hug. His clothes, which looked like he had rolled around in charcoal, made him flinch a little. He smiled and said, Boss Mobai, have you had lunch? If you haven't eaten, clean up and come over to eat with us. Can we go together? We'll pay for it, Cece came up and said with a smile. Of course, this meal is on me. Meg nodded with a smile. I'll go get Master Julian. Amy got down from Mia's arms and ran toward the magic potion shop. You shouldn't have called that old bastard, Crassus murmured with a disdainful expression. Meg picked up Anna and patted her head with a smile as he turned to Mia and Barbara, and asked, "Did anything happen at the restaurant during these past few days?" Mia nodded with a smile on her face, and replied, "Yes. Aside from many customers coming to the restaurant every day to ask when you're coming back, everything is normal." Meg could imagine the customers leaning against the floor-to-ceiling windows and looking into the restaurant with resentment, and he couldn't help but feel a little amused. However, he looked past Barbara into the restaurant, and a peculiar expression appeared on his face as he asked, "Where's Aisha? Didn't she come to the restaurant today? And Blower, is he also not back yet?" The smile on Mia's face faded, and a concerned look appeared on her face as she said, "Aisha said she had to go out a few days ago, and hasn't returned yet. However, she said she would come back to work. Blower still hasn't returned. Neither of them have returned." A contemplative look appeared on Meg's face. When Blower had entrusted Anna to him, he felt as if he were entrusting Anna to him. Immediately thereafter, Sally had also disappeared. His brows furrowed as he thought to himself, but both of them are quite powerful in the elven race, so they should be fine, right? At the sight of the concerned expressions on Mia and Anna's faces, Meg offered a consoling smile. "Don't worry, they're both very powerful, so they should be back soon." Irina had already returned to the Wind Forest. With her around, there was no need to worry about Sally and Blower in the Wind Forest. At the sight of Meg's reassuring smile, Mia and Anna's concerns were immediately alleviated significantly. "All right, let's go in first. I'll prepare lunch for you." Meg carried Anna into the restaurant with a smile on his face as he asked, "Anna, have you been practicing your cutting techniques these past few days?" "Yes, I have." Anna nodded in response. Mia followed them into the restaurant, and said, "Anna has been practicing very seriously. She's been cutting up a large tub of potatoes every day, and all of them have been diced into tiny pieces." "That's great." Meg looked at Anna with approval in his eyes. Mia continued, "The potatoes were bought by Barbara at the market. She said there were many children who didn't have enough to eat, so we made potato balls out of Anna's diced potatoes and distributed them to the children. Crap. I was in such a hurry to get home that I forgot to prepare food for the children for the next few days." Luna, who had just entered the restaurant, slapped her own head with a self-reproachful expression before quickly making her way over to Barbara with a grateful expression, and said, "I thank you on behalf of the children." "Thank you so much." Meg also turned to Barbara with a hint of surprise on his face. He smiled and said, "You've all done very well, especially the kind Barbara." Barbara's face immediately blushed, and she hurriedly averted her gaze from Luna and Meg. She looked up at the chandelier, and coughed dryly as she said, I just didn't want to waste the potatoes." Meg turned to Luna with a smile, and said, "The Foundation's funds should be ready soon. When the time comes, all of the children will be able to eat. The children should thank you, Teacher Luna." Novan walked in with a smile, and said, "The City Lord's castle and the Great Temple will be monitoring every single expenditure of the Foundation to ensure that all of the money is spent on the children. Chaos School will also use the funds to expand the school and increase the number of teachers so that those children can enter the school as soon as possible. This is a good thing. Shouldn't we have a drink for such a good thing?" Crassus walked in with a smile. He looked at Meg, and said, "Mr. Mac, can you give us 2 glasses of beer to quench our thirst?" "All right, take a seat. I'll go and cook for everyone." Meg put Anna down, and went upstairs to change before entering the kitchen. Chapter 806. It was their first meal back in Chaos City. Even though Crassus and Julian were at loggerheads with each other, the atmosphere was still very heartwarming. Meg looked at the men toasting each other, and the women eating with smiles on their faces. He put a piece of fish into Amy's bowl with a satisfied smile on his face. He had never thought that he would have friends who cared and looked forward to his return, and not just one. It was a wonderful feeling, and he liked it very much. After lunch, everyone took their leave one after another, and the restaurant regained its peace and quiet. Amy and Anna sat at the door, playing with Ugly Duckling, which was lying on the ground. The two little fellows' laughter was even clearer and sweeter than the doorbell hanging on the door. Meg stood up and reached out to clear the wine glasses. Yabamiya quickly took away the glass in front of Meg and smilingly said, "Boss, leave it to me and Barbara. You just came back and cooked for everyone. I already know how to use the dishwasher." Barbara stacked the plates and bowls on the table together and carried them to the kitchen. She's a fast learner. Yabamiya covered her mouth with one hand and softly said with a smile, "She's just a little shy." Meg looked at Mia's cheerful smile and withdrew his hand. He nodded with a smile and said, "Thank you for your hard work. This is what we should do." Yabamiya hooked a wine glass onto the tray with her finger and turned to walk to the kitchen. Meg retracted his gaze and walked to the door of the restaurant. "Mr. Mack. You're finally back." Meg had just walked out of the restaurant when two excited voices sounded at the same time. Two fat men who weighed more than 250 kilograms ran over in an imposing manner. "Yes, I just came back." Meg looked at Harrison and George, who were rolling toward him like two balls, and reflexively took a couple of steps to the side in case the two of them lost control and knocked him down. "I haven't seen you for a few days, and I missed you so much. I thought you didn't want me anymore." Harrison ran in an arc and stopped right in front of Meg. He grabbed Meg's hand and said with a resentful expression. His two short eyebrows twitched, and his round face successfully changed into a resentful expression. Meg immediately withdrew his hand and jumped back at the same time. He had goosebumps all over his body, and almost couldn't help but kick him. Meg was able to hold himself back, but George, who was standing diagonally behind Harrison, couldn't hold himself back any longer. He kicked Harrison's fat backside to send him flying to the side, and then stood in front of Mag with a smile on his face as he nervously asked, "Boss Mag, is the restaurant open today?" Harrison, who was kicked to the side, wasn't angry at all. He patted the dust off his buttocks and came over again. He also asked with concern, "Yes, Boss Mag. I've been starving for a few days waiting for this meal of yours. Look, I'm so hungry that my chest is almost sticking to my back." Meg looked at Harrison's fat waistline. There was clearly a half-meter thick pork belly between his chest and back. He shook his head with a smile and said, "Sorry, I just came back today, and I'm a little tired from the journey. Also, I haven't prepared the ingredients yet, so I'm not going to open for business today. We'll officially open for business tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" George's face was immediately filled with disappointment. His sunken eyes dimmed a little, and even his shoulders seemed to have sunk a little. Harrison took a look at George, and anxiously took a step forward. He grabbed Meg's hand again, and said, "Mr. Mack, I can eat tomorrow, but can you make a plate of Yangzhou fried rice for Miranda? You haven't been here for a few days, and she barely ate anything. The midwife said that she might give birth in a few days. This will be her fourth child, and it's very dangerous for her to be in this state." Meg, who was about to withdraw his hand, looked at George with surprise. He hadn't seen him for a few days, and he did look a little older. The dark circles under his eyes were a little heavy, and his face was a little swollen. When he looked up at Meg, his eyes were full of hope and sincerity. This was the father of 3 children, and the husband of a pregnant woman who was over 9 months pregnant. His silent gaze made Harrison's heart ache. I'm sorry, I didn't know this would happen. I'll make a plate of Yangzhou fried rice and a bowl of chicken soup for Madam. I hope she and her children will be safe. Meg looked at George with an apologetic expression. An elated look appeared on George's face, and he extended a deep bow toward Meg as he said, "How could I blame you for this? I should be the one thanking you. Mr. Mac, I knew you were the best." Harrison let go of Meg's hand and patted George's shoulder with a smile on his face. "You're a good friend as well." Meg smiled as he quickly strode into the restaurant. At the same time, he said, "Let's go in and have a seat. Uncle Blue Fatty, is Auntie Miranda going to give birth to a little baby? Is it really going to be a little girl?" Amy, who was squatting down and teasing Ugly Duckling, stood up and looked at George with anticipation in her eyes. Anna also looked up at George with curiosity in her eyes, clearly also very interested in a little girl. After receiving Meg's promise, George was clearly a lot more relieved. He nodded at Amy with a smile and said, "That's right, she's going to give birth soon. It's definitely going to be an adorable little princess like Little Boss." Amy clapped her little hands together and said, "That's great. I'm definitely going to visit her when the time comes. I love little girls the most." Meg entered the kitchen and brought out the pressure cooker that he had bought a few days ago for research purposes. He made a pot of fragrant chicken soup. Miranda hadn't eaten anything in the past few days, so Meg didn't make the braised chicken. Instead, he added some goji berries and red dates to make a pot of nourishing chicken soup. After that, Meg made a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. This was what George always ordered, and it was Miranda's favorite dish. Furthermore, the Yangzhou fried rice had been infused with the spring of life, which was very gentle and had very good restorative properties. It was undoubtedly the most suitable food for Miranda right now. "This is chicken soup. You can make her drink more of it." Meg placed the chicken soup in a large clay pot and carried it out. "All right." George hurriedly hugged the clay pot with both hands carefully as if he were holding some kind of treasure. "Leave this to me. I'll make sure it's delivered to sister-in-law safely." Harrison took the box of Yangzhou fried rice from Meg's hands, and also held it with both hands with an extremely solemn expression on his face. Meg reminded, "Heat up the chicken soup at night, and you can continue to drink it. You can come and get the Yangzhou fried rice at around 5 p.m. You have to eat well for the next few days." Chapter 807. Meg shook his head and said, "You're welcome. Sister-in-law and the kids are still waiting for you. Let's go back." "All right." George walked out of the restaurant with the pot in his arms, but he stopped as soon as he reached the door. He turned around and said, "By the way, I haven't paid you yet. That won't be necessary this time. Just take it as a token of my appreciation for the unborn child." Meg smiled. "Mr. Mac, you can't fight with me over this. I'm her godfather." Harrison pulled out a money pouch from his pocket and placed it on the table as he urged George to go out with a smile. "The friendship between men is probably like this." Meg walked over to pick up the money pouch on the table. He didn't need to open it to know that he had given too much. However, he wasn't going to take too much money. He would just deduct it slowly. Boss is such a good person. Yabamiya stood at the kitchen door and looked at Meg with admiration in her eyes. Babla, who was operating the dishwasher in the kitchen, also turned to look at Mag through the glass window. She was very perplexed as she thought to herself, "He really does seem like a good person. The books say that most men aren't good people. Could he be different?" Even though he had to cook 2 extra dishes, Meg was in a good mood, and he wrote a new notice to replace the one from a few days ago. Back. Business will commence tomorrow. Meanwhile, Sally and Babla had also finished their cleaning work. Even though Sally's absence made cleaning a lot more troublesome, Mia's actions proved that she could still wipe the tables and chairs clean without the slightest grease, even without the use of magic. "Father, can I go to the square with Miss Anna?" Amy asked as she held Ugly Duckling in one hand and Anna in the other. "Boss, I'll go with Amy and Anna. You can rest for a while." Mia walked over and placed her hand gently on Amy's shoulder. She looked at Barbara with a smile, and said, "Barbara, do you want to come with us?" "Yes." Barbara glanced at Meg, took off her apron, and nodded without hesitation. She didn't want to be alone in the restaurant with Meg. It would be super awkward. "Go ahead then." Meg nodded with a smile. The Aiden Square was relatively safe, and with Mia and Barbara, a 7th-tier spatial magic caster, there shouldn't be any problems. He also wanted to see what changes the system had made to the restaurant after upgrading it to level 3. After everyone left, Meg looked at the shiny activation button in his mind and chose to activate it without hesitation. Ding! The restaurant was successfully upgraded to LV3. It will take 3 minutes to activate. The system's brisk voice sounded. Next, Meg heard a series of fine noises coming from all around the restaurant. It sounded as though countless ants were simultaneously gnawing at the restaurant, causing the entire restaurant to shake slightly. Meg's expression was calm. The internal structure of the restaurant hadn't changed much. It seemed that the upgrade this time was more focused on improving the defense system. If that was the case, he lost some of his expectations. Ding! The restaurant has been successfully upgraded. 3 minutes later, the system's voice sounded again. System, what changes have been made to the restaurant after this upgrade? Meg looked around, but couldn't see any changes in the restaurant. Even the arrangement of the tables and chairs hadn't changed in the slightest. Host, after this upgrade, the restaurant's passive defense system has been upgraded to the 5th tier. It is immune to all attacks below the 5th tier, and it will provide a warning to the host. Aside from name, race, gender, and power level, the omniscient door will also provide the host with limited information about the other party's physical condition, including blood sugar, blood pressure, and other general health data. System, did you upgrade the door of physical examination? I'm running a restaurant, so what's the point of knowing the health data of my customers? Meg rolled his eyes. He was a little perplexed by the system's upgrade. Host, the most important thing when running a restaurant is to ensure that all of the customers can walk out of the restaurant safely. If any accidents happen to the customers after eating the restaurant's food, it would be a fatal blow to the restaurant. Knowing the customer's physical condition is the best way to prevent such accidents from happening, the system explained in a serious voice. I'm just a chef, yet I still have to worry about a doctor. Meg curled his lips. However, food safety was indeed very important to a restaurant. It was better to be safe than sorry. Thus, he accepted the system's explanation. However, system, this upgrade can't be so unoriginal, right? No matter what, this is still level 3. Meg said with a face of disappointment. At present, he didn't see any changes in the restaurant. Wrong. The truly amazing thing is naturally at the end. The most important thing in this upgrade is that the system has added the latest research to Amy's. Furthermore, it has already completed the experiment of the molecular isolation system. The system's voice carried a hint of pride. Molecular isolation system? Meg asked with a face of doubt. Yes. It's the molecular isolation system. The system uses the atomic wall to isolate the odor molecules according to the principle of the diffusion of odors in the form of molecules. Put on the glasses at the side and take a look. It's so high-tech. Meg looked at the pair of VR-like glasses that appeared on the table beside him. He picked it up and put it on his head. The holographic view brought a good technological experience, and the entire restaurant was in his eyes. Molecular isolation system activated. The system said softly. A series of glass-like things appeared in the restaurant, separating all the seats into independent spaces. Only the aisles were unobstructed. This is the atomic wall. Meg looked at the light walls with a look of disbelief. He hesitated for a moment before reaching out to touch the wall in front of him. His hand passed through the wall with ease, and he didn't feel any impediment at all. Meanwhile, the atomic wall seemed to have been glued to Mag's hand, and there was no gap at all between it and his hand. The atomic wall will not affect normal traffic. Unless it's someone who has a deep understanding of atoms, they won't even be able to sense the existence of the atomic wall. In addition to blocking odors, the air in the independent space can also be purified after the guests leave. This ensures that every guest will have the most comfortable dining experience and enjoy the delicious smell of exclusive food. How is it, host? Do you think it's amazing? The system's voice was full of praise me. Chapter 808. In a room with the curtains drawn in a rather intricate little manner, a female servant was looking at the pale-faced woman on the bed with an anxious expression. "Mistress, please eat something. The midwife said that you're going to give birth in the next 2 days, but you haven't eaten anything for so many days. That won't do." Miranda was lying on her side on the bed, and her abdomen was bulging as if she were about to give birth at any moment. However, her swollen face was extremely pale, and she opened her eyes in a feeble manner to look at the bowl of porridge in the servant's hands. Her throat moved, and her stomach began to churn. She retched a couple of times before closing her eyes again, and shaking her head as she said, "I can't eat, take it away." She knew that she had to eat something for the sake of her child, but she really couldn't do it. No matter what it was, she would begin to vomit as soon as she put it into her mouth, and there would be nothing left in her stomach aside from stomach acid. She still couldn't even drink a spoonful of porridge. Even when she had given birth to Angus, this hadn't happened. She recalled what the midwife had said to her after she had given birth to Angus, and that she couldn't have any more children in this lifetime. Otherwise, she would die, and a wry smile appeared on her face. She didn't tell George that she only wanted to give birth to a daughter for him, even if it meant risking her life. But the servant still wanted to say something. Right at this moment, Miranda's stomach suddenly moved, and a pained expression immediately appeared on her face. Her body curled up like a prawn, but she gripped the edge of the bed tightly to prevent herself from moving too much. Her pale face was instantly drenched in cold sweat, and she cried out in agony. "Mistress!" The servant hurriedly put down the bowl of porridge in her hands before rushing over in a flustered manner, but she was completely at a loss for what to do at the sight of Miranda's curled-up body. She screamed, "Someone! Mistress is about to give birth." Not long after that, the door of the room was pushed open from the outside, and 2 elderly women in headscarves quickly strode into the room. One of them quickly made her way over to the bed before grabbing onto Miranda's hand with one hand and gently stroking her stomach with the other. Miranda's belly gradually stopped moving, and the pain on her face also lessened a lot. However, after this round of torment, her face became even paler. She lay weakly on the bed, and even her breathing became a little weak. The 2 midwives looked at Miranda on the bed, then looked at each other. They both sighed softly, got up, and left the room again. There were already many people waiting outside the door. Barbara was holding Palmer's hand tightly. Angus was being coaxed by a maid. The servants were all standing not far away, praying for their kind mistress. George's father, old Williams, had a grave expression on his face. Some of the important members of the Williams family were also present. Seeing the midwife come out, they hurriedly asked with concern, "Has the child been born?" "Master, she hasn't given birth yet. she's having contractions. However, this also means that the child is about to be born. It's just that. The midwife hesitated. But what? Old Williams asked. The midwife hesitated momentarily before saying, Madam's belly is much larger than normal, so this child is most likely going to be bigger than normal. However, Madam's body is currently extremely weak, and this is her 4th delivery. It's most likely going to be very difficult for her to give birth to the child. Everyone's expressions changed upon hearing this. Everyone knew that Miranda's condition during this delivery wasn't very good. The last time she gave birth to Angus, she almost had a brush with death. However, who would have thought that the situation this time would be even worse? What do you mean by that? Old William's expression also changed, and his voice involuntarily rose a few octaves. The other midwife wore a grave expression as she said, Master, I can only tell you about the current situation. In Madam's current condition, there's no way that she can give birth to the child. However, the child is about to be born, so you have to make a choice before the next contraction. Do you want to save her or the child? Everyone in the courtyard looked at Old Williams. No matter who it was, such a choice would be a cruel thing to do. Their expressions were somewhat unbearable. Mother. Palmer's eyes immediately reddened. Big brother, is Mother going to give birth to a little sister for us? Palmer looked up at Palmer with anticipation on his little face. Palmer looked down at Palmer and his Adam's apple bobbed, but he still nodded firmly, and replied, Yes, Mother is going to give birth to a little sister for us. That's great. I like little sisters. An elated smile appeared on Palmer's face, but the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He looked at Palmer with a perplexed expression and asked, But, Big brother, why are you crying? Old Williams stumbled slightly, and only managed to steady himself by holding onto the tree beside him. He looked in the direction of the room with a pained and conflicted expression on his face. He looked around and yelled, Where's George? Where did he go? Young master. Young master said that he went out for a while, but he didn't say where he was going. The butler replied. The midwife was a little anxious as she said, Master, we have to make a decision now. If we delay any longer, Madam will most likely, this. If I make a decision, George is going to hate me for the rest of his life. Old Williams slammed a fist into the tree beside him, and heaved a heavy sigh. There were already some young female servants in the courtyard who were sobbing softly. Miranda was such a kind person, and she treated them as if they were her own family. Grief spread throughout the courtyard, and even Angus seemed to have been affected by it, and he began to cry loudly. Old Williams hung his head in dejection, but he still couldn't make up his mind. No one in the courtyard dared to say anything, and they could only sigh in silence. The 2 midwives were stomping their feet anxiously. They had been midwives for decades, and had seen situations like this before, but what could they do? In this situation, they could only save one child, and as the family, they had to make a decision. If they delayed any longer, they could lose both children in the end. Save the child. Father. Please save the child. I can feel that this is a daughter. George has always wanted a daughter. Just as everyone in the courtyard fell silent, Miranda's feeble yet determined voice sounded from the room, and there was a hint of relief in her voice. All of the women in the courtyard burst into tears, and even the men couldn't help but turn away to wipe their tears. Mother. Don't leave us, Mother. Mother. Palmer let go of Palmer's hand, and ran toward the room. He collapsed in front of the door, and yelled at the top of his lungs. Sigh. Old Williams heaved a heavy sigh, and his tightly clenched fists broke through the rough bark of the tree. He looked up at the midwives, and squeezed out a few words from his throat with great difficulty. Save the child. Even if you want to save the child, you can only save the adults. A thunderous voice sounded from outside the door, and George rushed in with sweat all over his body. He was holding a large clay jar tightly in his hand, and he said, "Palmer, open the door." "Father." An elated look appeared on Palmer's face as he stood up and pushed open the door with all his might. Chapter 809. Master George, Mistress is now. The midwife was just about to chase after George. "Excuse me. Excuse me." Another voice sounded from behind, and Harrison rushed over like a whirlwind, almost knocking over the midwife. He rushed all the way to the door of the room before stopping abruptly. He immediately turned around and looked at the midwife, who had been knocked over 3 times. He forced a smile onto his face as he panted heavily and said, Give this to her. Once she eats it, she'll be able to keep both of them." The midwife pushed the box away from Harrison's hand and said in a panicked voice, "It's still time to eat there. If we don't get there soon, both of them will be gone." Ouch! Harrison hurriedly caught the box in his arms, and his expression changed as he said, "Calm down. This was made by Mr. Mac, and Miranda loves to eat it. If she doesn't eat, she won't have the strength to give birth." Harrison pulled a female servant out from the side, and shoved the box into her arms as he yelled, "Hurry up and give it to her." "Oh!" The female servant was a little flustered, but she still obediently carried the box into the room. "Mother!" Palmer had already thrown himself onto the bed, and was weeping as he looked at Miranda, who was lying on the bed. "Palmer! George!" Miranda opened her eyes to look at George, and 2 streams of tears flowed down her cheeks. "Miranda, Mr. Mac is back, and he made chicken soup and Yangzhou fried rice for us. Let's eat something first before we give birth." George's entire body was trembling, and he spilled the bowl of porridge on the table to the side before lifting the lid of the clay pot. The rich and delicious aroma of chicken soup instantly wafted out of the clay pot and filled the entire room. Lying on the bed, Miranda's nose twitched, and a glimmer of light lit up in her eyes. The long-lost hunger suddenly surged up, and that strong desire made her feel as if she could eat an entire cow. She couldn't help but gulp, and even the pain seemed to have lessened a lot. "Mr. Mac. This is Mr. Mac's scent." A glimmer of hope seemed to have appeared in Miranda's heart, and she was even struck by the urge to sit up. "It smells so good." Although the maid at the side looked nervous, she couldn't help but think in her heart when she smelled the fragrance. But in Madame's current situation, would drinking chicken soup really be of any use? George carefully poured the chicken soup into the bowl, but his trembling hand still spilled almost half of the soup. "Chicken soup. Miranda, let's drink some chicken soup first." George quickly made his way over to Miranda's bedside with a bowl of chicken soup, and the maid standing at the side hurriedly placed a small pillow under Miranda's head. She couldn't move around in her current condition, or else she might end up in a worse situation. "Come, open your mouth." George brought a ladle of steaming hot chicken soup over to Miranda. He scooped up a spoonful of chicken soup and blew on it before slowly pouring it into Miranda's slightly open mouth. The chicken soup was still a little hot when it entered his mouth. Then, the fresh taste spread to the tip of his tongue, like the spring rain gently caressing his taste buds, giving life to his tongue that had been tasteless for a long time. He carefully felt the mellow and slightly sweet taste from the chicken soup. It was like some kind of wonderful fruit, making the taste of the chicken soup even more wonderful. Gulp. Miranda's throat moved, and the warm chicken soup flowed down her throat. Her parched throat was moisturized, and wisps of energy flowed into her feeble cells. Her heavy body seemed to have regained a hint of energy. What was even more miraculous was that the warm sensation didn't disappear after entering her abdomen. Instead, it was as if it had been absorbed by the fetus, and there was a warm feeling in her lower abdomen. The pain down below was immediately alleviated significantly, and the fetus that was initially a little agitated seemed to have been pacified as well. Miranda's expression immediately became a lot more relaxed, and her face lit up slightly. "Mistress! Mistress drank it!" the maid exclaimed with elation. They had tried everything they could think of during the past few days, but they were still unable to get Miranda to eat anything. Who would have thought that she would be able to drink a mouthful of chicken soup? "Mother, you'll definitely get better." An elated look also appeared on Palmer's face, and he held onto Miranda's hand tightly as he spoke in a sobbing voice. "Come, open your mouth again." An elated look also appeared on George's face, and he scooped up another spoonful of chicken soup before carefully feeding it to Miranda. Just like that, George fed Miranda spoonful after spoonful of chicken soup, and Miranda's complexion gradually improved as a hint of color returned to her pale face. George stood up to pour more chicken soup, and Miranda gently held on to Palmer's hand as she said in a gentle voice, "Don't cry, Palmer, you're a man." Palmer hurriedly wiped the tears from his face as he nodded vigorously. "Yes, Palmer, I won't cry. Good girl." A smile appeared on Miranda's face. Even though she was still very feeble, she was clearly in much better spirits than before. Her lower abdomen was so quiet that it was as if the fetus in her belly had already fallen asleep, and the warmth flowing from her lower abdomen gave her some strength. Miranda turned to George and said, "Help me up, I want to sit up and drink." "All right." George looked into Miranda's eyes before handing the bowl over to the female servant. He carefully helped Miranda into a sitting position before tucking a soft blanket behind her back. "The chicken soup is delicious." Miranda looked at George with a smile on her face. George's nostrils flared rapidly, and he forced a smile onto his face as he said, "Then drink some more. Mr. Max said that drinking it will benefit you." "All right." Miranda nodded as she opened her mouth. George hurriedly blew on the chicken soup before slowly feeding it into Miranda's mouth. "Why isn't there any sound?" The two midwives looked around the room with perplexed looks on their faces. According to their experience, this was the most painful moment of a pregnant woman's life, and the excruciating pain would almost cause her to faint, yet the room was completely silent. Everyone in the courtyard was also quite perplexed. George had suddenly returned with a clay pot in his arms, and the room had immediately fallen silent. Even Palmer and George weren't saying anything, which indicated that Miranda's condition wasn't very bad. Could it be that he had found some kind of miracle medicine? It must be Mr. Mac's chicken soup and Yangzhou fried rice. Chapter 8:10. After drinking 2 bowls of chicken soup, Miranda's complexion improved significantly. A smile appeared on her face, which was slightly flushed from the heat, and her eyes, which had been filled with despair, were filled with vigor again. Miranda could feel a very comfortable warmth in her lower abdomen, and her feeble body had regained some strength. Her entire body had been nourished by the chicken soup, and she was reinvigorated. George accepted a bowl of fried rice from one of the maids, and turned to Miranda as he said, "This is your favorite Yangzhou fried rice. Have some fried rice before you drink the chicken soup." The 2 maids stood off to the side with expectant looks on their faces. After drinking the extremely delicious chicken soup, Miranda's complexion had clearly improved significantly. If she could eat some more rice, perhaps she really would have the strength to give birth to her child. The lid of the insulated container was lifted, and the aroma of Yangzhou fried rice wafted out, along with the refreshing aroma of eggs. Miranda's eyes immediately lit up. This was the familiar aroma that had captivated her, as well as the delicious food that had sustained her for so long. Her various reactions during the past few days had made her realize one thing: if it weren't for the fact that she had been eating Mr. Mac's Yangzhou fried rice and other delicacies for the past few months, she most likely wouldn't have been able to hold on for so long. It was Mr. Mac's delicacies that had sustained her and her child until now. Here. George scooped a spoonful of fried rice and fed it to Miranda. The golden eggs that were perfectly wrapped around the rice were exuding an alluring aroma, and the rice grain-sized ingredients complemented each other in vibrant colors. Miranda suddenly raised a hand and grabbed onto the handle of the spoon in George's hand. She looked into his eyes, and said, "I'll do it myself." George faltered slightly upon seeing this, but he still carefully let go of the spoon. Miranda slowly brought the spoon to her mouth. The soft fried rice entered her mouth, and it was still the same familiar taste. The egg melted almost immediately in her mouth, and the rice grain-sized winter bamboo shoots and green beans were crunchy and delicious. The egg-wrapped rice was filled with a sweet flavor, and the soft ham was mixed into the rice, and there seemed to be a hint of shrimp in it as well. All kinds of flavors were contained in this mouthful. There was probably no food more delicious than this in the world. Miranda's eyes were closed, and a blissful smile appeared on her face. During her pregnancy, the happiest moment was undoubtedly enjoying Mr. Mac's delicacies, which allowed her to forget all of her discomfort. After swallowing this mouthful, Miranda felt a warm sensation all over her body. Furthermore, there seemed to be some kind of mysterious energy that was spreading toward her limbs and bones, turning into a power that she could feel. It was constantly filling her body and unblocking her meridians that had become heavy over the past few days. She couldn't stop eating one spoonful of delicious fried rice after another, and the feeling of being constantly filled with energy made Miranda a little excited. If her physical condition could return to normal, she would have the confidence to give birth to the child again. She still had 3 children and a child that was about to be born. How could she bear to leave them just like that? A smile finally appeared on George's face as he looked at Miranda, who was eating the fried rice one mouthful after another. He had almost fainted the moment he entered the room, but who would have thought that Miranda would recover so much of her strength after eating the chicken soup and Yangzhou fried rice? Even the doctors couldn't do anything about it. "Mr. Mac, how can I thank you?" George thought to himself as he poured another bowl of chicken soup and looked at Miranda with a gentle expression. Palmer glanced at the large clay pot on the table, then at the lunch box in Miranda's hands, and a contemplative look appeared on his face. The female servant who had brought the lunch box into the room earlier wore an elated expression as she quickly strode out of the room. "How is Miranda doing?" Old Williams strode forward as he leaned against an old tree, and asked the female servant. Everyone in the courtyard was also looking at her with nervous expressions. The silence in the room made all of them extremely anxious, and they had no idea what was going on. Even the 2 midwives were quite curious. They had never encountered a situation like this before, and under normal circumstances, Miranda should have already fainted from the pain. The female servant was a little flustered at the sight of so many people staring at her, but she still hurriedly explained, "Mistress drank the chicken soup that Master George brought back, and she's eating her fried rice right now. She seems to be in much better spirits, and the child in her womb isn't throwing a tantrum either." How is that possible?" The midwife had an incredulous look on her face. She had just seen Miranda's condition with her own eyes. She was already barely breathing when she was lying there, let alone sitting up and eating. How could she be alive after drinking 2 bowls of chicken soup? Could it be that she had drunk some kind of miracle medicine? "That's great." Elation appeared on the faces of old Williams and everyone else in the courtyard. This was undoubtedly the best news. However, everyone was also quite curious about what kind of chicken soup Miranda had drunk. How could it have such miraculous effects? Even though the midwives had already determined that Miranda could only choose between herself and the child, she had regained her strength. "Don't you know who made the chicken soup and fried rice? It would be strange if they didn't have any effect after eating them." Harrison had been resting on the ground for a long while, and there was a hint of pride on his face. Everyone turned to Harrison. George was currently in the room with Miranda, and Harrison had just returned with George, and he was still holding that lunchbox, so he definitely knew what Miranda had drunk. The midwives who had just urged old Williams to make a decision were a little embarrassed, and she turned to Harrison with a slightly agitated expression as she asked, "What did you give mistress? Was it some kind of magic potion?" Magic potions can allow mistress's body to recover for a short period of time, but they will have extremely negative effects on the fetus. In severe cases, the fetus could even become a retard. In the midwife's understanding, the only thing that could allow Miranda to recover her strength in such a short period of time was a magic potion concocted by a magic caster. This type of potion was prohibited for pregnant women, and it would cause irreversible effects on both the pregnant woman and the child in her womb. If George had given Miranda some kind of magic potion to recover her strength for a short period of time, then the worst-case scenario would be that both of them would die. Everyone in the courtyard also turned to look at Miranda with concern in their eyes. It was already common knowledge on the Nora continent that magic potions were harmful to pregnant women. How could it be magic potion? We're not idiots. Harrison immediately sprang up from the ground, and calmed himself down before smiling as he said, "This is the chicken soup and Yangzhou fried rice made by Mr. Mac from Amy's. He just returned from the royal banquet held in Rodu to celebrate the king's birthday. Do you think he would put magic potion in the chicken soup?" First update. At the same time, I have a piece of good news for everyone. The comic rights of Daddy's Restaurant have been licensed, and they're the comic company of the Doluo continent, Fengxian Animation. They're most likely going to release a standalone book. Even though it hasn't been confirmed yet, one thing is for sure, you'll be able to see a comic version of Amy in the future. Chapter 8:11. The courtyard fell silent for a long while. The midwife's mouth gaped open, but she didn't dare to question why a chef who had just cooked for the king of the Roth Empire would put magic potion in the chicken soup. That wasn't something delicious, and the mistress couldn't even stomach plain porridge. Meanwhile, everyone else's eyes lit up. I heard that even the head chef of Dukas restaurant wasn't invited to the Roth Empire's royal banquet. Could it be that this Mr. Mac is even better than head chef Beat? I've heard of Mamie's as well. It seems to be a very popular restaurant recently, and there's always a long line in front of the restaurant. That restaurant owner's chicken soup is so amazing. Wouldn't it be safer for all pregnant women to drink a portion before giving birth? Everyone began to discuss spiritedly among themselves. Most of them were curious about this Mr. Mac that Harrison was referring to. Regardless of whether it was his chicken soup that had brought Miranda back to life, or his cooking for the King of Roth, all of them were astonishing feats. Even after drinking the chicken soup and eating the fried rice, Mistress' condition is still not looking good. She could go into labor at any moment. The other midwife still wore a grave expression as she turned to the female servants beside her, and said, "Don't just stand here and watch, go and boil some water." The courtyard gradually fell silent. Everyone's expressions had eased a little, but they were still rather nervous. Even though Miranda's condition was a lot better now, giving birth was still a very close call. She should be fine, right? Harrison was also beginning to feel a little uneasy. Even though he had faith in Mag's cooking skills, he had heard from George about Miranda's physical condition. Back when she was giving birth to Angus, she had almost perished. In the room, Miranda had finished an entire bowl of fried rice, and put down the lunchbox that she'd licked clean, but she still hadn't had enough. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes were glowing with vigor. She appeared to be in a much better condition than the average pregnant woman. George accepted the empty lunchbox before carefully handing over the bowl of chicken soup as he said, "Have some more chicken soup?" "Sure, I want to have 2 more bowls after this. I've been vomiting for the past few days, and I don't have anything left in my stomach." Miranda nodded with an aggrieved expression as she accepted the bowl of chicken soup with both hands. She then placed her mouth on the edge of the bowl and began to gulp down the entire bowl of chicken soup. She then handed the bowl over to George. "All right, I'll get you another bowl." George nodded with a smile before pouring another bowl of chicken soup for himself. The pot of chicken soup that Boss Mag gave him was very big. After pouring out the bowls one after another, the pot was only half full. They would definitely be able to have another meal tonight. After drinking 2 more bowls of chicken soup, Miranda rubbed her stomach in satisfaction. She hadn't tasted the delicious taste of food for many days. Now, her whole body was warm and full of energy. It was so comfortable that she wanted to sleep. George put down the bowl and sat on the edge of the bed, looking at Miranda with a gentle gaze. "Thank you, George." Tears welled up in Miranda's eyes as she looked at George. "Silly girl, I should be the one thanking you," George whispered into Miranda's ear as he gently hugged her. A blissful smile appeared on Miranda's face. However, her expression suddenly changed as she placed a hand on her stomach and yelled in pain, "Aw! The baby! The baby is coming, quick! Get the midwives in here!" George was also quite panicked as he hurriedly grabbed onto Miranda's hand and said, "I'm here, Miranda. Don't worry, you two go out first, the baby is going to be born soon. Get them to bring hot water here. Hurry!" The 2 midwives who were already waiting outside rushed in before helping Miranda lie down again. They then pushed George and Palmer toward the door in a slightly rough manner. "Ah! I can do it." Miranda forced her eyes open as she looked at George, who was unable to move, and spoke in a determined voice. George picked up Palmer before turning to the midwives with a resolute expression and said, "No matter what happens, I'll protect Mistress. I have to protect her. All right, you two go out now." The midwives nodded before pushing George out of the door. Miranda turned to the midwives with a pained expression and said in a soft voice, "Granny. If I have to choose, I have to choose the baby. Don't say anything, Mistress. The baby is coming out soon, get ready to push. Where's the water? Get them to bring the water here." Miranda's screams and the encouraging voice of the midwives rang out from within the room. The female servants hurried in and out of the room with basins of water, and the entire courtyard was completely silent. Everyone was looking toward the room with tense expressions, awaiting the outcome. Miranda's screams were quite unsettling to hear. It was difficult to imagine what kind of pain a gentle woman like her had to endure to scream like that. George clenched his fists tightly, and a few veins had popped up on his forehead as his breathing accelerated. Palmer's hands were clasped together, and his eyes were tightly shut as he murmured something to himself, as if he were praying. All of the servants looked down with saddened expressions. They couldn't bear to hear that she was going through such pain, and that she might not even be able to survive. Miranda's screams had been going on for a long while, and right at this moment, her screams came to an abrupt halt. Everyone in the courtyard turned toward the room in unison, and all of them were stunned to see what was going on. "Wah!" A crisp cry suddenly rang out, and a female servant rushed out of the room with elation on her face as she yelled, "It's born! It's born! It's a boy! Both mother and son are safe! That's great!" A burst of cheers immediately rang out in the courtyard, and smiles appeared on everyone's faces. An elated look also appeared on George's face, and he felt as if all of the energy had been sucked out of his body, and he almost fell over. Thankfully, someone beside him quickly caught him. "As long as both mother and son are safe, that's all that matters." Harrison also heaved a sigh of relief. He then turned to George with a peculiar expression and murmured, as expected, "It's another son. I like sons too." George just so happened to overhear Harrison's words, and he turned to glare at him. Harrison shrugged with a nonchalant expression and said, "Yeah, I like it too." I have another godson now. Wah! George paused for a moment, and was just about to enter the room when the sound of another infant's cries rang out. The loud cries of two infants sounded from within the room. Everyone faltered upon hearing this. Mistress gave birth to another one. It's a daughter. Twins. Another female servant rushed out with elation on her face. George walked into the room, and quickly made his way over to the bedside as soon as he did. He bent down and gently hugged Miranda, and his tears flowed uncontrollably onto her face. Chapter 8:12. Ding, 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 the sound of knocking came from outside the restaurant. Meg, who was making a cake with Amy and Anna in the kitchen, glanced at the information displayed on the omniscient door, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face. However, he still washed his hands and opened the door. Mr. Mack has given birth. She has given birth. Harrison yelled excitedly as soon as Meg opened the door. She has given birth. Father, what is she giving birth to? Amy, who had flour on the tip of her pen, poked her head out from behind, and carefully sized up Meg's stomach for a while before asking with a puzzled expression. Anna, who had 3 pairs of cat whiskers on her face, poked her head out from the other side, and said with a serious expression, Grandpa said that men can't give birth to babies. Meg held back his laughter. These 2 little guys really made a pair. He looked at Harrison with a smile, and asked, Did Madam give birth? Yes, yes, yes. Harrison slapped his own mouth with a silly smile, and said, See, I was so anxious that I said the wrong thing. Madam gave birth to twins, a boy, and a girl. Wow, did she just give birth to a warm little sister? Amy's eyes lit up immediately. And a warm little brother, Anna added, her eyes also filled with curiosity. Yes, the children were just born, and George couldn't get away, so he asked me to come and thank Mr. Mack first. Harrison bowed solemnly to Meg, and gratefully said, If it weren't for your chicken soup and Yangzhou fried rice, Madam and the 2 children would be in trouble. You don't have to be so polite. It's just a small matter. The most important thing is that Madam and the children are safe. Meg shook his head with a smile, and a strange feeling welled up in his heart. In his previous life, he lived a carefree life, but received countless curses and scoldings, and was even sent to this world as punishment by the heavenly Tao. But now, he had saved a mother and 2 children, and received heartfelt gratitude from others. This feeling was indeed a lot better than being scolded, and it allowed him to find the meaning of what he was doing now. Chefs could not only bring delicious food to people, but sometimes they could even save lives. Father, can we go see our little sister? Amy looked up at Meg and asked. Anna also looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. George said that he would visit Mr. Mack personally to thank you when he has time. I still have to inform those guys to visit my goddaughter, so I'll take my leave first, Harrison said with a smile as he prepared to leave. Meg looked at the expectant looks in their eyes, and hurriedly asked with a smile, May I know where George lives? Since these 2 children are fated to be with me, I'll visit them in 2 days. Harrison gave an address and hurried off. I'll take you to see your little sister in 2 days, Meg smiled and patted the heads of the 2 little guys. Then, he brought them into the shop to continue making cakes. News of Meg's return made the regulars very excited, but they were all discouraged when they saw the new sign on the door. Sigh, I know Mr. Mack is in there, but I can't eat the delicious roast beef. This feeling is so painful. I want to break down this door and lock Mr. Mack up in a little dark room. I'll make him cook non-stop, and I won't let him out until I'm satisfied. Does anyone want to team up? Calm down, big brother. 2 great magic casters, the city lord, and the principal. Are you sure you want to try breaking down this door? That That, the blue sky, the customers discussed among themselves for a while, and even though they were angry, they still left with smiles on their faces. Dinner was steak and ice cream cake. Anna and Amy had participated in the making process, so they enjoyed the food very much. During dinner, Yebamiya asked Meg about the royal banquet in Rodu, and Meg gave a brief summary of the results. Yebamiya, Barbara, and Anna's eyes all lit up as they stared at Meg with incredulity in their eyes. "Boss, you're so awesome. So many chefs participated in the royal banquet, but you still managed to win the Best Dish award." Yebamiya looked at Meg with reverence in her eyes. "Uncle Meg is so awesome." Anna also had a look of reverence on her face. "Best dish at the royal banquet. That sounds impressive." Barbara looked up. That's right. Father is so awesome." Everyone couldn't take their eyes off the dishes he made, so of course he won first place, Amy said with a proud expression. Meg was naturally in a good mood as the girls looked at him with reverence in their eyes. He cut into his steak with a smile, and said, "This is an ice cream cake that even the king didn't get a chance to taste, and a black pepper steak that he'll never get a chance to taste again. You should all eat more." After dinner, Yebamiya and Barbara were just about to clear the table when Meg poured himself a glass of water. He looked at the two of them and said, "By the way, I'm going to provide an employee dormitory for you and Aisha. If everything goes as planned, you can all move there the day after tomorrow. It'll be more convenient and safer for you to live closer to each other." Dormitory. Yebamiya and Barbara both faltered slightly upon hearing this. Mia shook her head and said, "Boss, the place I'm living in is quite cheap, and it's also quite clean and tidy. You don't have to prepare a dormitory for me, I'll go to work on time every day. Are you trying to kick me out?" A hint of panic appeared on Barbara's face. She didn't know what an employee dormitory was, but she could tell that Meg was most likely trying to get her to move out. She still didn't quite understand what kind of world this was. How could a man hold a woman's hand and even wrap his arm around her waist in public? This world was far too dangerous for women. The restaurant was still quite safe for her at the moment, so she was naturally a little flustered to be asked to leave. Meg looked at Barbara with a smile, and shook his head as he said, "I'm not trying to kick you out, it's just that I don't think it's very convenient for you to live here. If you live in an employee dormitory, the three of you will feel more at ease living together." He didn't like living with other people to begin with, and Barbara's accommodation was only a temporary solution. He had already decided to ask the system to build a compact 3-bedroom apartment on the second floor of Ricky's rotisserie for Yebamiya and the others to use as an employee dormitory. In any case, he had no plans to expand his restaurant there at the moment. "Is that so?" Barbara's voice immediately trailed off. Living with Meg really did make her feel a little uncomfortable. If she could live with Mia and Aisha, she would definitely feel a lot more comfortable. "Mia, this is an employee benefit, and I'll feel more at ease if the three of you live together. You're the most important members of the restaurant," Meg said as he turned to Yebamiya. This little girl was always so considerate of others. Chapter 8:13. After dinner, Yebamiya went to the ice cream shop happily after getting Mag's permission to teach her how to make ice cream cake when he had time. She planned to make up for the rest of the day's business hours. Amy was doing some math problems, and Meg instructed Anna on her knife skills. She practiced in the kitchen, and he went upstairs to pick up the book, The General History of the Norland Continent. This general history of the Norland continent was split into 2 parts. The first part was mainly about the legends of the various races, and even some records about the origins of their own races. The authenticity of these records had yet to be verified, but they were still very interesting to read as anecdotes. In ancient times, the human race was divided into tribes. They were weak individuals, and they struggled to survive among the other races. Survival was the most important thing for every tribe, and almost no events were recorded. 10,000 years ago, the organization known as the Church appeared. Magic and knights appeared in the records of the human race for the first time. The human race began to rise. The scattered tribes formed an alliance and gradually gathered together. They began to have a place among the other races. They grew stronger in the racial wars and eventually became one of the 8 major races. Meg looked at the records in the book, and a contemplative look appeared on his face. The Church, an organization that appeared in human history in a strange way, gave humans the cultivation methods of magic casters and knights, and completely reversed the course of the human race. However, in an era that was close to primitive civilization, all of the tribes were struggling to survive, so how did a church suddenly appear? However, Meg still couldn't find any more information after flipping through the entire book. There were only a few brief sentences in the book, and it said that the first magic casters were called witches, and they were only female. The Church is truly a mysterious organization. Meg closed the book with a contemplative look on his face. Amy had been chosen as the next pope, so he wanted to know more about the Church. However, the information recorded in this book was too broad, and he was going to buy some books on the Church tomorrow to study it. He wanted to see what kind of organization this strange church was. Can I have a look? Barbara suddenly appeared in front of Meg, and pointed at the 2 books in front of Meg. Of course. Meg looked up at Barbara with a smile as he stacked the 2 history books together and pushed them in her direction. As a transmigrator, the most important thing to do after coming to this world was to understand what kind of world this was, and only then could they reconstruct their own worldview. Meg had fused with a portion of Alex's memories and received a portion of his worldview, so he didn't have to go through that step. Barbara had spent most of her time in the restaurant after coming to this world, so it was beneficial for her to read more books and understand the world. Thank you. Barbara picked up the 2 heavy volumes of history, and her face was filled with joy. She turned around and went upstairs. Why was there a teleportation portal in the Moon Nation's palace? Why was there no difference between the language of this world and the language of the Moon Nation? Why did the women of this world become vassals? These were all things she wanted to know, and these 2 books might be able to give her the answers. Meg shook his head with a smile. This princess's ability to accept things had exceeded his expectations. After all, the princess had been transmigrated to a completely foreign place, and had even become a waitress in a restaurant. This was not something that anyone could accept. He checked the answers for Amy, who had just finished the math problem, and then went to the kitchen to check on Anna, who was slicing potatoes in a methodical manner. The knife fell on the chopping board with a crisp sound, and the sound was clean and crisp, and there was a sense of rhythm to it. The metal bowl next to her was already filled with small potatoes that had been cut to the size of rice grains. The grains were even, and each one looked as if they had been measured with a ruler. You've made great progress. Cut this one and call it a day. Meg looked at Anna with a hint of approval. Even an adult wouldn't be able to achieve this in just a few weeks, let alone a 5-year-old child. Anna nodded with a smile on her face, but her movements were still meticulous. Meg stood at the door and looked at Anna's back with a smile as he thought to himself, this is probably what it means to be talented, right? Perhaps she really can become the best elf at cooking. Meg didn't throw away the potatoes that Anna had cut. Instead, he mashed them into mashed potatoes, kneaded them into small meatballs, coated them with egg, dipped them in bread crumbs, and deep-fried them until golden brown and crispy. He then took them out with a controlled oil filter. Both the elderly and the children loved to eat them, and the children next door were craving them so much that they cried. Crunch. Amy took a bite of the small golden meatball in her little hand, and the crispy skin made a crisp sound. The aroma of the bread and egg became very fragrant after being deep-fried, and under the crispy skin, there was a hint of soft mashed potatoes. It was a little hot when it entered her mouth, and the sweet and glutinous texture of potatoes melted in her mouth, bringing with it a hint of the taste of French fries. Amy's eyes immediately lit up, and she exclaimed in surprise, "Potato meatballs are so delicious." Crunchy, sweet, so fragrant. Anna took a bite of a potato meatball, and a thoughtful expression appeared on her little face. Compared to steamed potato meatballs, the taste is much more fragrant, and the soft and glutinous texture is clearly much better than the soft and mushy steamed potato meatballs. The secret lies in the egg and golden powder. Also, a lot of oil has to be added, and the potato meatballs are fried 3 times. The potato meatballs made in this way become a delicacy. Let's keep some for ourselves, and give the rest to those who haven't eaten yet. Meg put the potato meatballs into the small bags used to store Ruggiamos, and gave one to each of Amy and Anna before putting the rest into an incubator. They had already eaten dinner, so they clearly couldn't eat all of the potato meatballs, and the potato meatballs would lose their souls once they became cold. Rather than waste them, it was better to give them to those who needed them. Usually, the children would have gone back after dark, so Meg and Amy gave all of the potato meatballs to the homeless people in the Aden Square before returning home. After washing up, the 2 little girls changed into clean pajamas and lay down on their little beds, listening to Meg's bedtime story with rapt attention. Ugly Duckling lay down in the middle with its little head poking out, and its little paws resting on Amy's body. It fell asleep as soon as it lay down on the bed. After the story of the Smurfs was finished, Amy had already fallen asleep, but Anna's eyes were still open. "Anna, are you still not going to sleep?" Meg looked at Anna with a smile. She seemed to have something on her mind. "I'm worried about Uncle Blower and Big Sister Aisha." When Big Sister Aisha left, she said that she was going to find Uncle Blower, but they still haven't come back, Anna said in a soft voice with concern in her eyes. Ding-ling-ling. Ding-ling-ling. Mr. Mac. Mr. Mac. Chapter 8:14. Blower. A hint of surprise appeared on Meg's face as he read the message on the omniscient door. "Is that Uncle Blower's voice?" Anna sat up with a hint of incredulity on her face. Meg nodded with a smile, and said, "That's right. Blower is back, let's go downstairs to welcome them." "All right." Anna carefully got out from under her blanket and tucked Amy's blanket back in. She quickly put on her little slippers before following Meg downstairs. Meg switched on the lights in the restaurant before he quickly walked to the door and pulled it open. Sally and Blower stood at the entrance in a slightly disheveled state. Behind them stood close to 100 elves in tattered clothes. The nights in late autumn were already quite cold, so many children were shivering. Most of these elves were women and children, and all of them wore expressions of exhaustion and a hint of fear in their eyes. However, their eyes all lit up at the sight of the restaurant lit up by warm lights and transparent floor-to-ceiling windows. What a warm and beautiful restaurant. This was something that they had never seen before. Meg couldn't help but falter upon seeing this. For a split second, he thought that he had encountered an African refugee. In his mind, elves were generally graceful beings, and their clean and tidy clothes wouldn't be stained by any dirt, so how could they be in such a state? Uncle Blower. Anna emerged from behind Meg and looked at the cross-dressing Blower with an uncertain expression. "Anna. Blower squatted down and rubbed his hands together awkwardly. He didn't think that cross-dressing was a shameful thing, but he was still worried that Anna wouldn't be able to accept it and would detest him. As such, he didn't know how to explain himself. However, Anna immediately rushed over and threw herself into his arms before wrapping her arms tightly around his neck. Blower's mouth gaped open slightly, and his arms stiffened momentarily before he slowly wrapped his arms around her back with a vibrant smile on his face. "I'm afraid that you'll leave like Grandpa. I don't want you to go." Anna was choking up with sobs. "Of course not. I won't die so easily, so don't worry." Blower patted Anna's back with a smile. Anna hugged Blower for a while longer before letting go. She wiped away her tears before hugging Sally. "Don't cry, Anna." Sally gently wiped away Anna's tears and stroked her hair with a smile on her face. "It's good that you're back." Meg looked at the two of them with a smile, then turned to the elves behind them. "However, it seems like you've done something big this time." Blower looked into Mag's eyes with a pleading expression as he said, "Boss Mag, I have a favor to ask. Would you be able to cook a meal for my brethren? They haven't eaten for 2 days, and they traveled day and night all the way from the Wind Forest to here. I will pay for the meal." Sally also looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. Her lips moved, but she didn't say anything in the end. Mamie's was a high-class restaurant, and it was clean and tidy. In contrast, the elves who had been locked up in the cellar for a long time were giving off a foul odor. They had been in a hurry for the past 2 days, so they hadn't had time to bathe, so it was normal for Meg to turn down their request. Tears welled up in Anna's eyes again as she looked at the elves. She didn't know them, but she could already guess that they had been captured by those terrifying demons, and that Blower and Sally had saved them. Their expressions reminded her of her grandfather, and she knew why her grandfather had refused to let her be captured. She turned to Meg with tears welling up in her eyes. Meg looked at the elven children, and even though there were no visible wounds on their bodies, his heart was still aching for them from the looks of inferiority and fear in their eyes. What kind of torture had these children endured to become like this? Those demons deserved to die. "Come in, I'll cook for all of you." Meg stepped aside with a smile as he looked at everyone with a gentle expression. Blower extended a deep bow toward Meg and said, "Thank you." "Thank you, boss." Sally also nodded toward Meg in gratitude. "Uncle Meg, you're the best." Anna looked up at Meg, and tears welled up in her eyes, but she forced them back down in the end. The elves entered the restaurant, and due to the limited number of seats, many of them could only stand. Some children squeezed into one chair with 2 elves, while others carefully sat down on the ground. The comfortable temperature in the restaurant made all of the elves feel a lot more at ease, and they began to look around with curiosity in their eyes. The soothing colors and warm lighting, the translucent chandeliers, the intricate murals, and the intricate decorations made everything look so beautiful. Even though all of the elves had relaxed a little, they were still very cautious and restrained. Even the elves sitting on the ground were carefully kneeling on the ground, as they didn't want to dirty the floor with their shoes, nor did they want to take up any extra space. Meg went upstairs, and quickly came back down. He turned to Sally with a smile, and said, "Aisha, go take a bath first. I've prepared a set of clothes for you in the bathroom." "I'm fine." Sally shook her head and wanted to refuse. Meg cut off Sally's words as he looked into her eyes, and said, "There are so many customers here, and I need your help. You can't serve customers like this." Sally looked at her blood-stained clothes, then looked into Meg's eyes, and nodded before quickly making her way upstairs. "Mr. Mack, do you need my help?" Blower made his way over to Meg. "Have a seat. My restaurant never requires customers' help." Meg shook his head with a smile. "Is big sister Aisha back?" Barbara had heard the commotion and just so happened to come downstairs. A hint of surprise appeared on her face at the sight of all of the elves sitting in the restaurant, and she turned to Meg with a question. "That's right." Meg nodded with a smile as he turned to Barbara and said, "However, I need your help now." One cup of water after another flew out of the kitchen before landing in front of the elves with unerring accuracy. The water in the cups didn't ripple in the slightest, and all of the elves looked on with awe and reverence in their eyes. After taking a bath, Sally came downstairs in a set of blue and white porcelain cheapao, and all of the elves were stunned by her beauty. In the kitchen, several stoves were lit up at the same time. Meg was like a martial arts expert as he held a spatula in his hand, and spun around in front of each of the metal pots in a fluid motion. He then tossed his spoon, and one plate of Yangzhou fried rice after another landed on a platter that had already been prepared. Let's start with the dishes. Meg was washing the pots as he spoke to Barbara in a calm manner. 20 plates of Yangzhou fried rice had already been completed. Chapter 8:15. Plates of fried rice flew out of the kitchen and scattered toward the elves who were sitting near the entrance. The alluring aroma of fried rice spread in all directions. The colorful Yangzhou fried rice looked like it was made of chopped up rainbows in the sky. It was placed on elegant white porcelain plates, and there was no need for any patterns. The fried rice itself was the most beautiful decoration, and it glowed slightly under the light. It was so tempting. Gulp. Gulyulu, gulping sounds and rumbling stomachs sounded in the restaurant. All of the elves' eyes were attracted by the flying plates of Yangzhou fried rice. The alluring aroma was beyond their imagination. The fluttering plates landed lightly, starting from the direction of the door, accurately landing in front of each elf. There was even a spoon on each plate. The elves who received the fried rice were at a loss. The alluring aroma in front of them made them unable to move their eyes away. However, no one picked up a spoon to eat, and they seemed to be a little uneasy. After washing the pots, Meg walked to the entrance of the kitchen with a smile, and said to the elves, "Eat. Everyone will get their fried rice, but you'll have to wait for a while." The elves looked at the smile on Meg's face. Although he was a human, he looked very amiable, and they couldn't help but want to trust him. After receiving Meg's permission, the elves all picked up their spoons and scooped a spoonful of fried rice into their mouths. It was as if a delicious bomb had exploded in their mouths. The taste of all kinds of ingredients blossomed in their mouths, and they were all blended into their mouths. They constantly attacked their taste buds, and it was irresistible. There was also a faint fragrance among the fried rice. It didn't belong to any of the ingredients, but it was impossible to ignore. The fragrance was so clear, and it blended perfectly with all of the ingredients. Even after swallowing, the fragrance still lingered in their mouths. The children couldn't describe what kind of fragrance it was, but it gave them a different kind of warmth. It flowed down their throats, and then gradually spread through their hearts. They felt the power of life, and the feeling of hunger disappeared. Their stomachs were warm, and even their hearts seemed to be warmed. It's so delicious. This is the most delicious food I've ever eaten. It's a pity that my little sister won't be able to eat it. This must be the most delicious food in the world, right? How can it be made into such delicious food? It's so warm and comfortable. I miss Mommy. The elves looked at the Yangzhou fried rice in their hands, and their faces were filled with surprise and disbelief. Some elves even shed tears, and some elves were cured. However, the deliciousness of the food triumphed over everything else. How could one bite of such deliciousness be enough? The sound of spoons clanking against the plates could be heard. The elves, who hadn't had a proper meal in a long time, couldn't care less about their table manners in the face of such delicious food. They simply couldn't stop eating. The elves who had yet to get their share of fried rice had already swallowed countless mouthfuls of saliva. Their hunger was multiplied by the aroma of the fried rice, and they almost bit the table in front of them. "Uncle Meg, let me help you." Anna had put on her little apron and walked into the kitchen with a little stool. She looked at Mag with a serious expression as she spoke to him. Meg looked at Anna and put a plate of winter bamboo shoots aside with a smile. "Okay, Then can I ask Anna to help me cut these ingredients? The size should be the same as the potatoes you cut just now. All right. Anna nodded with an earnest expression. She picked up the bamboo shoots and began to carefully cut the ingredients in her own little area. 5 pots of Yangzhou fried rice were made by Meg before being served to all of the elves by Barbara and Sally. Even though the Yangzhou fried rice still wasn't enough, all of the elves' hunger and debilitation had been completely alleviated, and their minds had also become very clear. It was just like when the princess had healed them in the wind forest, and their entire bodies were brimming with a sense of comfort. All of the elves who had finished their meals made way for the elves who hadn't eaten yet. Even though their clothes were in tatters, they still displayed the elegance and grace of elves. The sounds of praise never stopped, and the elves wore blissful expressions on their faces. It had been a long time since they had smiled from the bottom of their hearts like this. The delicious food brought them an unprecedented sense of happiness, and it also gave them a new sense of hope for survival in this city. A beautiful beginning always gave people a beautiful vision for the future. Sally and Blower also smiled at the sight of the elves' blissful smiles. If they could start afresh happily, then there was still hope for life. I'm going to become a chef like Uncle Meg, who brings happiness to others. Anna looked at the elves who were happily eating their fried rice, then looked up at Meg's tall and broad figure with yearning in her eyes. All of the elves had already finished their meals, and Meg made his way out of the kitchen with 2 plates of Yangzhou fried rice. He turned to Sally and Blower with a smile, and said, "Everyone's eaten, so this is yours. Sit down and eat." Blower looked deeply into Meg's eyes, and said in a slightly solemn voice, "Thank you." "You're welcome. Even though you look like a sissy right now, you're very manly." Meg placed his plate onto the table that the elves had vacated with a smile. "It sounds like a compliment, but why does it sound a little strange to me?" Blower raised an eyebrow as he sat down with a smile. He scooped up a spoonful of fried rice in an elegant manner, and put it into his mouth as he praised, "Only you can match up to my beauty. Only you can do this." "Thank you." Sally extended a grateful bow toward Meg. She also sat down, scooped up a spoonful of fried rice, and then closed her eyes. As the familiar taste blossomed in her mouth, all of the hardships and pain that she had endured along the way seemed to have disappeared, and her panicked heart gradually settled down. She opened her eyes, and was greeted by the sight of the familiar restaurant and the pair of gentle eyes. This feeling of warmth made her feel as if she were at home. After the 2 of them had finished their meal, Meg asked in a quiet voice, "What do you plan to do next? If I'm not mistaken, your statuses shouldn't allow you to take care of them openly." All of the elves in the restaurant also turned to look at Blower and Sally. Even though they had already arrived at Chaos City, they still didn't know where they would be able to settle down. Blower and Sally looked at one another with complex expressions. With their statuses, it was indeed inappropriate for them to take care of these elves. Otherwise, they would be viewed as opposing all of the major families, and even their own families. That would be extremely detrimental to their long-term plans. "I'll get the Elven Consulate to take care of their accommodations for now. We should be able to keep this under wraps for a while." Blower's voice was a little feeble. It was quite clear that even he wasn't sure how long they could keep this under wraps. "Princess Irina saved us, and said that there won't be any demons coming after us." "Does that mean there won't be demons coming after us?" a little elf asked in a feeble voice. There was still a hint of fear in his eyes. A hint of surprise flashed through Meg's eyes. Blower slowly clenched his fists, but he didn't know how to respond. Chapter 8:16. The city lord's castle in the eastern part of the city was still brightly lit, and there were still workers going in and out of the building, as if they had endless work to do. On the western side of the city lord's castle, in a quiet study, 2 figures were standing beside a table with grave expressions. There was a map of the Norland continent spread out on the table. After a long period of silence, Novan heaved a forlorn sigh, and said, "The re-signing of the peace treaty in 3 months is most likely going to cause a lot of trouble. Alex is still alive, and he and Irina have killed Benson as well as 6 10th tier demons, orcs, and forest trolls. Even though they've been severely weakened, their alliance is most likely not going to let them off the hook so easily. No, what we need to worry about now isn't them. What we need to worry about is what he thinks." Michael slammed his hand heavily onto the map. The restaurant suddenly fell silent, and all of the elves turned to Meg with surprise on their faces. The restaurant owner who had just given them an unparalleled experience was going to arrange a way out for them. The suffering they had endured and the demons that were still lurking in the darkness were all extremely terrifying. Even though Princess Irina had saved them, she could only ensure that no pursuers would emerge from the wind forest to pursue them. As such, why was the owner of this restaurant, a normal human, helping them? What right did he have to say that he could help them? Blower and Sally were also looking at Meg with astonishment in their eyes. It was undeniable that Mr. Mack was indeed a good person, but he clearly wasn't one to meddle in other people's business. Why would he suddenly offer to arrange a way out for these elves? Furthermore, did he have a better idea? Uncle Meg really is a good person. Anna looked up at Meg, and thought back to that night when Meg had rushed out of the restaurant with a kitchen knife in hand. She was still very touched by his actions. Meg really wasn't one to meddle in other people's business. With his personality, even though he pitied these poor elves, he was already doing his best to cook dinner for them. In Chaos City, which was generally safe, he wasn't going to do anything for them. However, after hearing that name, he hesitated for a split second before blurting out those words. Meg looked at all of the astonished looks directed at him, and heaved an internal sigh. He could already feel his strong desire to live, and he didn't dare to pass up any opportunity to prove himself. Meg turned to Blower and Sally, and said, "I know a few people in the City Lord's castle. Perhaps I can ask the City Lord's castle to provide them some assistance. If they want to live in Chaos City for a long time, and become legal residents of Chaos City, then they'll be able to receive protection from the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple. Become residents of Chaos City." All of the elves' eyes lit up. They knew some information about Chaos City. The elves living in Chaos City didn't have to worry about being attacked or hunted down by demons. However, due to the pressure exerted by the Wind Forest, it had been very difficult for the elves to join Chaos City in the past few years. However, Meg was now saying that he could arrange for them to become residents of Chaos City, and all of the elves were naturally ecstatic to hear this. Is that really possible? Blower was also elated to hear this. He had thought about using the embassy to get these elves to join Chaos City, but doing so would drag Ingve and all of the elves in the embassy down with him. Furthermore, there was no guarantee that these elves wouldn't be stripped of their status by the Wind Forest. However, if Meg could directly contact the City Lord's castle, then arranging for these elves to join Chaos City would undoubtedly be the best solution. Meg nodded with a smile, and said, "I'm not sure if it'll work, but I'll try my best." "Thank you." Blower extended a deep bow toward Meg. All of the other elves also stood up and bowed deeply toward Meg. They were grateful for the delicious food, as well as for the fact that this human was willing to do something for them. "There's no need to be so polite, everyone. My daughter is a half-elf, so we're all friends." Meg helped Blower to his feet with a smile. He then turned to everyone and said, "Let's go to the City Lord's castle now. I have limited space here, so I can't accommodate so many elves. Perhaps the City Lord's castle will have better arrangements." "All right." Blower nodded. Meg turned to Sally and said, "Aisha, Amy is still sleeping upstairs. If you don't mind, can you look after her for me? If you're tired, you can also get some rest." Sally hesitated momentarily at the sight of Meg's sincere expression, but she still nodded in the end. All right. Anna, you should go to bed as well. I'll get Uncle Blower to pick you up tomorrow. Meg then turned to Anna, who was wearing her adorable pajamas, and patted her head with a smile. She got up from her bed again. It was cold outside, and Blower had a lot of things to do. As such, it was best for Anna to stay at the restaurant for another night. Anna nodded obediently before latching onto Sally's hand with a warm smile. Thank you for your hard work. Meg turned to Barbara with a smile. Barbara's spatial magic had enhanced the efficiency and beauty of the dishes, and she was able to fully showcase her abilities when there were so many customers. If there's nothing else, I'm going back to my book now. Barbara wore a nonchalant expression as she turned around, but a smile still appeared on her face. Good night, Anna. I'll come and pick you up tomorrow. Blower squatted down with a smile on his face. You have to come this time, Anna said with a serious expression. I will. Blower nodded in response. Meg led the elves out of the restaurant and toward the city lord's castle. The elven procession of over 100 people naturally drew the attention of many passers-by. Since when did such a large group of elven beggars appear in Chaos City? Blower wasn't in the procession. Instead, he maintained a certain distance away from them. They made their way to the city lord's castle, which was still brightly lit. The guards at the gate of the city lord's castle were all quite nervous at the sight of the procession of elves, and they gripped onto the long swords hanging from their waists. Wait for me here. Meg raised a hand to signal for everyone to stop before quickly making his way over to the procession. Oh, it's Mr. Mac. What brings you to the city lord's castle so late at night? And who are those elves? The leader of the guards raised a hand to signal for the guards to relax upon seeing Meg. He had been one of the guards at the restaurant during the negotiation between the dragon race and the demon race. After that, he had become a loyal fan of Mamie's, and would always go to the restaurant for a Ruggiemo whenever he had the time. I have an important matter to report to the city lord regarding these elves, so I hope you can inform him of this. Meg had naturally also recognized that this leader of the guards was a regular customer of the restaurant, but he didn't try to curry favor with him under such circumstances. Instead, he cupped his fist in a salute. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.